Hey everybody, what's going on? Rob Cesternino back here once again to talk about the 27th best season of Survivor, according to you, the listeners' rankings of the 40 Survivor seasons on our top 40 countdown. Today, we are talking about Survivor Guatemala, the 11th season overall of Survivor. And we have a great panel to talk about Survivor Guatemala. One is gold, one is platinum. I'll leave it to you to decide who's who. Of course, very excited to get to talk with the busiest man in podcasting, taking a break from his coverage of Big Brother Canada and also The Circle. Taran Armstrong is here. Taran, how are you?
I'm good. I'm happy to be with people who aren't scumbags. Definitely looking forward to not getting bitten by crocodiles.
Yes. Okay. Taran, so good to have you on board here to talk some Survivor here today. And then we have a honest to goodness Survivor historian here with us to talk about all things Survivor Guatemala. It was no Rafe's choice to bring this man aboard. Give it up for Mike Bloom.
I am thrilled to be here for a whole pyramid of reasons, Rob, Taran, everybody out there, because I do admit there is a secret I've held for the 7 years I've been podcasting. I have not been giving you the proper last name, and I hope that finally in this podcast, you can finally call me by my real name, Mikey Hogabloom. That's my true name.
Oh, Mikey, I'm going to beat you down. You'll see. How could you? I'm going to look you up. Wow. Okay.
Is this why I haven't been able to find your address every time I've tried to look you up?
No, listen, I went to the same college as Mike Bloom, but I didn't know him. I'm not the same person as him, very clearly.
Did you even used to be a man whore at all?
Listen, don't ask me what I did 15 years ago, okay? Because I'm not gonna lie to you about it. I'm not a liar. I'm a man's man.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Damn, man, whore. All right. So we have so much to get to. And what a great panel here today. This is going to be a really fun one to talk about Survivor Guatemala, a season which I really think kicked off the second, would you say, decade? I mean, it wasn't like a decade in years in terms of like basically the teens of Survivor. And I feel like really tried to kick it into a new gear of physicality that we see here in this season. So there's a lot to break down there. First time we get the returning players brought back to be coaches, basically, of a season. Unfortunately for Survivor, this is a format that we have talked about pretty extensively here in the all-time countdowns in the first 14 seasons that we've talked about here between South Pacific, Redemption Island, and the edge of extinction. Only really Survivor Philippines has somehow managed to avoid the bugaboo of bringing back returning players as basically captains of teams. But we'll talk about the first time they do it here with Stephanie and Bobby John and much more here. And we are back live here today on a Wednesday. Of course, that we have Big Brother Canada coming up tonight streaming, so it'll be a very busy day for Taran. But because Taran needs to be on Big Brother Canada, we're here earlier in the day to talk about Survivor Guatemala. So we are back live streaming here, and then we'll be back with the live stream again once Big Brother Canada wraps up. I have one more surprise to add in here for you. So we are going to have Talking with T-Bird is going to be back this week, and I'm very excited to say that we are going to be talking with the stealth bomber herself, Danny Boatwright, on Talking with T-Bird. So that should be very exciting.
So surprising. She beat the radar on this one.
She beat the radar. She snuck right in. Nobody saw it coming.
She didn't beat the podcast charts, though. She's making the podcast charts in that regard. That is super exciting. I'm glad she's going to open up to you guys more than she did Survivor production back in 2005. And especially with Winners at War brought to light, I know that she certainly has a lot to say about both her very different experiences on Survivor. So, I mean, it really has been sort of like a Guatemala renaissance, or at least from the discussion perspective in the past couple of years. And Danny is continuing that conversation.
So be on the lookout for that. That's going to probably drop over the weekend. I think Sunday night we'll get that Talking with T-Bird out to you. And of course, we will get to your questions here today, but we'll continue answering more of your questions on our feedback show that we do every week for the patrons. And we have the three amigos together. It's going to be Mr. Guatemala, Jordan Kalish, Aaron Robertson, and Nick Fishman on the patron feedback show that we do every week. If you want to hear that this weekend, check out everything going on in our patron feed at robinsonwebsite.com/patron. All right. We talked about the returning players coming back as coaches, and I guess let's dive in here because I think thematically that sort of sets the tone for the season. Stephanie and Bobby John. Taran, did you have feelings in the real time about the return of Stephanie and Bobby John?
I did actually. As a kid, I was very pleased. I was very excited because it really was. Palau felt like such a momentous season. It was like the first time anything like that had happened, and this sort of, I remember like the sort of the air of that time was like that. These two would have been great if only they had a better tribe. If only they really survived so long, and we'd never seen a tribe of two before. And so it was so cool to see them come back, and it was like, oh, now they're gonna do so well because they're going to have good tribes. And it was very exciting.
Yeah, Mike, there was no bigger Survivor juggernaut, maybe like not since the first season or two, than Stephanie LaGrossa coming off of Palau.
I mean, I would say Rupert might come close. It nets him $1 million. But yeah, Stephanie, I think it's safe to say of the first 10 seasons, Stephanie LaGrossa was by far the most popular female player. And definitely, I would say in the top 5 of most popular players of all time. It really cannot be understated how much people love Stephanie, the journey that she underwent. You see on the show that there are people in this season who tell Stephanie, I applied for the show because of you. Like, her story is incredibly inspiring. And then with Bobby John, to Taran's point, you get someone who some people might have felt was screwed a bit in Survivor Palau, right? He wasn't actually voted out. It was just that he was on a tribe of 2 and had to face down in a fire-making challenge, and not in the fun Final Four variety even. He doesn't even make it to the merge. But still, Bobby John is one of my favorite characters of the first 10 seasons, and he still is, even watching him back, because I love that we essentially get the Survivor version, the Alabama mode of Dr. Bruce Banner and the Hulk, right? Where you have Bobby John, this genteel Southern gentleman, like, yes, Miss Stephanie, I'm just going to do my work around camp, and I think we're all going to do a great job in the challenge. And then as soon as Jeff hits that go bell, he's snarling, he is growling, he is giving himself an aneurysm, basically, with each and every challenge. And so I love the effort with which he brings it here. And so having these two come back, I mean, it was a really fantastic thing to see as fans of Oolong and Palau, but it's also very weird. Rob, you said it before, and I'll say it again. Survivor Guatemala is a weird season of Survivor, and that is why I am so excited to talk about it. It's not like the Nicaragua version of weird, where it's sort of negatively tinged. There's so much odd stuff that is happening in this season, in the experimental era of Survivor, truly. And one of these being, this is the first time we saw returnees and all-stars, but this is the first time we're going to bring in people who have already played the game before to play with a bunch of new people. It's old hat by 2021, but back in 2005, it was truly a game changer.
Yeah, and the timing on this is also interesting because Survivor Palau airs in the spring of 2005. And so basically the finale of Survivor Palau airs, and then they probably go and are filming this within 2-3 weeks of the finale of Survivor Palau. So Palau is very fresh in everybody's minds. And Stephanie was such a no-brainer. But this does feel like one of these things, and we talked about this with Survivor South Pacific, where it's like, okay, we want to bring back returning players. They're like, okay, let's bring back Coach. And then I think they wanted Philip. They couldn't get Philip. It's like, all right, so let's think, who else could we bring back? Oh, how about Ozzy? And here it's like, well, who do we bring back with Stephanie? Taran, they end up going with Bobby John, but I still, as much as Mike loves Bobby John, that one is still the head scratcher for me to bring back Bobby John. Like, why, what was so great about these two that made it through Oolong to come back and play again in the next season?
I mean, I really think it's the story from Palau, and I think it makes such an impact. The fact that it had never been seen before, and a lot of people feeling like they deserve a second chance, like they were let down by their tribe mates. They should come back and have another shot at this, another real shot at this. And with Stephanie coming back, it does kind of make sense to me that, yeah, you'd bring back Bobby John as well. Obviously, I think that there are probably plenty of better options in terms of male castmates that they could have picked.
Yeah, could I throw something on that? So I've been thinking about this over the last couple of days, and does it have to be another man to bring back? I thought about, how about this as the other person you bring back with Stephanie? What about Amy from Vanuatu? Basically, the other like female standout from the previous season. You bring back sort of like post All-Star. All right, here was sort of like the person who was like a strategic challenge threat in Amy, who was like a really big figure in that season, and then also Stephanie. Like, Mike, you think that that's a fair way to make these captains be, instead of just Stephanie and Bobby John?
I mean, listen. I love me some Amy Cusack. You throw Amy Cusack on a season, I'm going to eat it up. But that doesn't go with the theming of the returnees, in my opinion. I think, to Taran's point, it really was about second chances. This idea of like, oh, well, this person didn't really get a fair shot. Even though Stephanie makes it all the way to 7th place, people might argue like, well, if she started out on Karor, she had that, that alliance on the first day, she'd be fine. To the point where the rumors going into this season, it wasn't, let's bring back Amy Cusack, let's bring back Johnny Fairplay. It was, how about Jonathan and Wanda? They might be the returnees. How about a certain Australia contestant is putting his scarred hands possibly all over Survivor Guatemala? There was certainly talk about how, in this regard, it was less so titans of the game coming down from the pyramid, and more so people that might want another chance to sort of continue the narrative, which, to your point, Rob, is a bit incongruous with the way Jeff introduces them, right? Essentially, like, these are the chiefs of your new tribes. These are the Mayan gods ascending from down high that are going to assist you in this game.
Yeah. Again, I haven't rewatched Survivor Palau yet in this countdown. I don't think we will for a while, but it's like Stephanie and Bobby John had their chances in Survivor Palau. Like Wanda and Jonathan were screwed much worse than Stephanie and Bobby John were. I mean, they had Taran, they were in a challenge 2-on-2 against like the B team of Karor, and they couldn't even get it done.
Rob, this is a different time, Rob. This is a time where Bobby John is seen as one of the toughest Survivor players of all time.
Yes.
And
Jeff describes him as the hardest working Survivor ever. Sorry, Butch.
I feel like when you look back at it, it feels like, what were they thinking to some degree? But at the time, it really just made sense to me, at least, as a, when was this?
2005, yeah.
5, 6, yeah. So I was like 14.
Yeah. I think, Mike, in the real time coming off of Palau, were they sort of like seen, not necessarily like as a romantic couple, but kind of like a duo, Stephanie and Bobby John?
I mean, to a certain extent, even
pair.
Well, even though I think their last episode, Stephanie does not have kind words for Bobby John, right? He's nasty. He's blowing snot rockets all over the cave that they're in. And you sort of get a sense here in this season that actually the two of them don't really like each other. It's more of a marriage of convenience of like, we just happen to be the last two on a tribe, and now people link us together. But that's also fun to pair them up too, right? As sort of oppositions of, maybe there's that blood versus water aspect of like, oh, will they turn on the other one? But then there's also a natural sort of competition of like, you know what? If I get to finally win an immunity challenge, like my heart does not sink so much for the other person on that other tribe.
Yeah. So the locale of Survivor Guatemala is really incredible. Mike, would you say, is this the season, at least aesthetically, that is most interesting to look at, in terms of like the season was played amongst the Mayan ruins?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about tribe camps, if we're doing an play out list on tribe camps, number one by far has to be freaking Mayan ruins. The remains of a civilization had Judd Sargent playing on them. That is it's absolutely remarkable. And I mean, good on the tourism board for allowing that to happen, considering what some people do on the ruins over the course of 39 days. I'm very surprised, or hopefully the cleanup crew got their money's worth after the fact. But even outside of the actual Mayan ruins, the challenges themselves seem to be all themed around the Maya. You know, this is outside of Fiji and Thailand. This is one of the first times in this countdown, Rob, that I think we are significantly diving into a time when Survivor tended to reflect a lot of its aesthetic around the culture, and especially in this aspect around history. And while maybe in retrospect, some of the colonial aspects and this idea of like, you know, a mostly white cast encountering native aspects might seem a bit taboo and doesn't play it particularly well, I really do enjoy Guatemala in particular with how much lore and history they try to pack into a season.
Yeah, they definitely lean into that quite a bit over the course of the season. And of course, it's worth mentioning, perhaps, Taran, the most physical season to date and perhaps ever.
Yeah, and it really is like the setting and the physicality of it are really what would stand out to me in my memory. I remember just feeling like this is so tough. And I think probably Africa was very difficult as well. But this one, it always stuck out to me as one of the more unique seasons of the show. Both in terms of its setting and in terms of just how it plays out. I always remember like the little dock with the pool and the crocodiles and the soars and the hike. And the ruins, and it just it stands out in that way, in a way that it almost becomes forgotten because it is so unlike other seasons of Survivor. But that's why I've always loved it.
Now, all right, let me just get this out of the way. This season is too damn low. I don't call many things a travesty, but I love talking with you guys, and I love talking about Guatemala, but I am very sad we're talking about Guatemala at this point. While we're extolling even so many virtues at the top here, just makes me look back and be like, number 27? Really? Really, people? Number 27?
Well, let's explore that. Why do you think that is? Because this is not a season like some of the previous seasons that I've talked about. Also, a big shout out to me for completing over now 33% of our all-time season rankings rewatch. I'm still
That's a big
here.
Accomplishment.
Yes, but through many of the seasons in the bottom third of Survivor, that they are seasons that have very upsetting incidents that happen in terms of we have things like, inappropriate touching and incidents of racism and sexism and all sorts of things that, like, upon reflection, like, yeah, I don't know how much I really love going back and visiting with that season here in Guatemala. And again, perhaps, who knows, what might have happened in this season had they actually had a diverse cast. But there's no incidents to speak of in terms of any reason that you could point to for it being a bottom third landing spot in the countdown.
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, there was hopes that people would get eaten by crocodiles, so that was.
Do you think that's what it is? And they didn't deliver.
There were promises. I think honestly, this is less so marred by negativity. I think Aaron Robertson talked about this a bit last week. We are starting to get into the Survivor blind spots. Where there are a lot of seasons that I think if people do not rewatch, they forget about. I have been beating the drum that Survivor Guatemala is the most underrated Survivor season of all time, and it's not underrated but it's not the underrated in the realm of like, oh, it's people hate it, but there's good parts of it. More so, nobody really talks about it, and there's a lot of really good stuff to it. And I think to that point, because we rarely see any returnees from it, there are no notable things, and even concepts like returning players and the hidden immunity idols get accelerated to much more like flashy value in later seasons. And the fact that this comes in a chronology where you yourself, Rob, and many others were tuning out of Survivor and we're not necessarily watching live. I was
here in the real time, though.
But it really falls between the cracks. And I think, it's a damn shame, man. It's a damn shame that we have to talk about it here, especially. Look, I do not want to impugn anyone's rankings, but I will say, if you out there ranked Survivor All-Stars above Survivor Guatemala. You may experience a knock at your door. I have sent Margaret to your house because you are clearly undergoing heat stroke for such an observation.
Oh boy. Yeah, I completely agree. I think the big, I mean, and it's been called the forgotten season. The cast members would often sort of complain that nobody ever gets brought back from Guatemala, which is funny because it was the first season to have a mixed cast with returning players. It is also the first season with an immunity idol, but sort of like I said, the fact that it is so unique kind of sets it apart. When you think about Survivor, you don't think about Guatemala, you think about Fiji. You think about the beach locations, which is like 90% of Survivor. And there just isn't representation from Guatemala. And the fact that probably the biggest character of Guatemala is Stephanie from Palau. I think doesn't help either, right? So I think there's just a lot of reasons why it just kind of gets forgotten. And it's also, for what it's worth, I think that the longevity of Survivor is in the strategy of it. Characters and setting is great, and I still love this season for it. But I think the reason Survivor has lasted so long is because the strategy is ever evolving and evergreen. And Guatemala is probably not the best example of a very strategic season that people, if they did go back, would be like, oh, this is so much, this is so interesting to watch this strategy play out. It's like,
That's a very good point. It is not a season where there is like really emergent gameplay where you point to any votes. Like even the season following in Survivor Panama, people point to 3-2-1 in Suri and the stuff that she does in that season. Nobody ever points to a move in Survivor Guatemala, where it seems like that a lot of the votes were based more on like personal feelings and relationships.
Yeah. So I mean, to that point, I think this is a season of relationships. It's not a season of strategy. I would go so far as to say the votes had some strategy tinge to them, but for the most part, especially when it came to this big alliance led by Rafe and Stephanie cannibalizing themselves, it was more so like how they were feeling towards their allies, more so than what's the best game move here.
Yes. And I also think that part of the reason why the season is not remembered as fondly is that I don't think that this is necessarily the story of how Danny won. I think much like we talked about with Survivor South Pacific a couple of weeks ago, that this is more the season of how Stephanie loses, and also I think how Rafe loses. I think that the two of them really conspire with each other to lose the game, and Danny, through, and she's said on multiple occasions that, okay, well, I don't really want to explain my strategy. So, whatever is there, it's hard to tell her story. So we don't get so much of Danny, not to say that take anything away from her win. It's just that we don't have that story to tell necessarily. It's more about how these other players lose the game. And I think that that's not necessarily a story, Mike, that we necessarily cling to.
Yeah, I mean, look at the end game of the people involved in the end game of Survivor Guatemala. And one thing I will say, again, that contributes to the fun, oddball nature of this season is the edit. The edit is just all over the place. You have someone like Jamie Newton, who I am fascinated with from a character perspective, where one episode he is a self-aggrandizing jerk, and then the next episode he's giving up, a well-cooked meal so that other people can eat. But if you look at the end game there, like you said, you have a winner who understandably, I think, refuses to vocalize her game for fear that it's going to be fed to the returning players to keep them in the game. You have two people who are the strategic forces, but are also coming across as like the biggest goats and could only really go to the end with each other. You have Lydia and Cindy, who are socially awkward when it comes to the relationships on the island. And so they're not exactly vocalizing the best strategy. And then you have Judd. And I don't know if you're going to Judd for anything resembling strategy, as much as I love Judd. So when you ask yourself, like, who is the narrator of this season, it's really tough to pinpoint, especially in that stretch. And one of the things I love about Survivor Guatemala is there are so many quirky characters, but those quirky characters don't necessarily fit into those typical narrator CPP gamebot roles that maybe a modern Survivor winner might get.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that Danny also is probably one of the least prominent winners of the entire show to this point. I think like Maybe you'd say Vesepia wasn't really given enough in her season. And even, Chris in season 9, who has a similar arc, but he is sort of describing what he's doing as he's making his way through as an underdog. And even he sort of has that as his arc. Whereas, the best we get from Dani is in the reunion when she says, yeah, I was a stealth bomber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The season is definitely an interesting one in that it is a pagonging, but Mike, it is sort of like a circuitous pagonging where it's sort of like, okay, they take two from the other side, but then they go back and take one of their own and they go back and forth. So it's not just like a straight shot like some of these other seasons that we've watched, like South Pacific and Redemption Island.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of culling, right, where you get the Brandon, Bobby, John, one right after the other. But I think it's almost a little like Kagayan-esque in a way, where you have these two people on top. In the case of Kagayan, it was Tony with Wu along by his side. But here it seems to be Stefan and Rafe, even though I actually think in rewatching this season, a lot of the decisions to get rid of people like Jamie, Judd, and Cindy are more so Rafe than they are Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
And really unfortunate irony that essentially Rafe makes the decisions that screws Stephanie over in the end, that now Jamie and Judd and Sydney are saying, thanks for voting me off, Steph. And Steph's like, it's Rafe. Rafe wanted to do that. It was Rafe's fault. But I think that it really was the two of them making those decisions on the whim to say, all right, Bobby, John, no, let's take off Jamie. Okay, we need to get rid of Gary now. He's sticking out too much. Oh, man, Dani just won immunity, and Judd is really getting on our nerves and really making me paranoid. Let's get rid of him. Sydney did what with the car? Let's get rid of her. Lydia's too likable. And then they find themselves get broken up at the top three. So the post-merge really is a story of these two at the tops of the pyramids, essentially figuring out their sacrifices. It just depends from which tribe they pull.
Yeah. The Stephanie of it all is really interesting because that going back and watching this, Taran, that I was really surprised how many times she deferred to Rafe on these decisions in the post-merge game. And in watching Boston Rob's Redemption Island season recently, and to a lesser degree, Coach in South Pacific, I thought that this was like a really good illustration of what not to do as the returning player. Like, she's the one with all this experience. And I think in all these instances, she kept just deferring the decision and then ended up coming back to bite her in the end.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because we'll even hear from Gary at the end saying that he felt like people were very starstruck by Steph, and it's the first time we're getting returning players in with new players, and it's the first time of many, many, many where one of them will make it to the final two. Whether or not they win, the jury vote at that point is down to how they treated other people along the way. And so it really did feel like Rafe kind of attached himself to Stephanie's star power and used her social influence to then sort of work the game to what he thought was best for him in his own vision, which was this kind of like, it's me and Steph to the end, and I'll take out all the people who I don't think are acting according to the correct moral compass.
Yeah.
And it definitely definitely screws Steph in the end. And if she had just played the typical returning player game, I think, and just kind of been like, these are my friends, these are the people I'm going to take to the end, and then I'll cut them, I think she has a much better shot for sure.
Well, that being said, though, I think I'm really glad that we have you particularly on for this panel, Taran, because I know Big Brother has obviously dipped these toes in these crocodile-laden waters of bringing back returning players alongside new players. I know certainly in Big Brother 14, there was the motto of, okay, we're not letting a coach win here. Like, no matter what,
no, that
we're
was
not
23 of Survivor, Mike.
Well, but the other, well, yeah, exactly. That was the final tribal council. But they sort of had this attitude, right, of like, they've already gotten their shot. And, in doing this season with the Survivor historians, I know Mario Lanza got a lot of insight from Rafe along the way. And apparently that attitude was prevailing here as well. And Steph also kind of vocalizes it in the reunion a bit where she's like, I was a goat. I don't understand why people didn't want to take me to the end. And I really do wonder how much of that Big Brother 14-ness existed in this season, where as soon as Stephanie and Bobby John step onto those mats, they say, great, it's fun to have you, but no way, no matter what you do, am I letting you win $1 million.
It's definitely possible, right? And I think that's why Rafe wanted Steph in the end with him so much, right? Like, for as much as he might talk about whatever, like Jamie did this, Judd did that. I think that he felt like using Steph's star power and the fact that he knew he could beat her in the end was a great play, and it was a great play. And I think that sort of how he describes his strategy is that he was trying to make sure that he was her only option to take to the end so that he could beat her. And so it's very interesting, and I think that it wouldn't surprise me as the first season with returning players mixed with new players that they would feel that way. That they would feel kind of cheated of like, hey, we love you and we will be starstruck by you, but this is our thing. It makes me wonder how much the end result of this season, where I think that who is Danny? Why did she just win? May help contribute toward the lack of this in coming seasons, where they're a little more used to the idea of returning players being added in, and the idea that they can win. That's fine.
Yeah, and Rob, I do think from an edit perspective, like you said, they really lean in on why Stephanie lost. And like we said, their hands might have been tied. But one of the things that obsesses me with this Guatemala edit is that it really just show from an editing perspective, like how much a tone can change probably like an exact line of dialogue. There's a couple lines in the pre-merge where Stephanie is like, I can't believe I'm on a tribe that keeps losing. If you play that in Survivor Palau, people say, oh my God, poor Stephanie. Like, oh, we root for you and must be so tough. You're boxed into a corner. In Guatemala, you're like, what is Stephanie bitching about? Like, stop it. Why you're such a villain right now? And it really is incredibly staggering. We talked about how uber popular Stephanie was in Palau. It came, I think, crashing down would be an understatement. She turned from Stephanie into Stephanie, as the internet would nickname her during that season.
Yeah, I mean, Stephanie is here with all of her flaws on full display. She has many regrettable lines of dialogue over the course of the season. A lot of them about Bobby John, talking about how she would describe him. We see her certainly. She does not like it if she does not get to eat, or if you accuse her of eating more than the other people. But what I thought that was really interesting in regards to Stephanie was that in my mind that I had misremembered everything with the car with Cindy, where Cindy, of course, is going to have, this is the second week in a row we're talking about the car curse, where Cindy ends up having the chance to, she has a car, a Pontiac Torrent 2006. She can keep it or she can give everybody the Pontiac Torrent. She says, you know what? I'm going to keep it. She takes Stephanie on the reward. What I did not remember in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, Stephanie is going to be so mad. Stephanie is the most understanding about this. And Taran, I think that this is something that you talk about a lot with the live feeds, that Stephanie, like, she's a self-interested person, right? She's like, oh yeah, why would anybody give a car away? Like that totally makes sense. Like nobody would do that. That's crazy. Where Rafe, and I don't know how much Danny might have been gassing him up about this, no pun intended. But Rafe is the one, well, how could she not give us all, because she had the opportunity to give 4 people a truck and she didn't do that. How could she do that? And Stephanie and Rafe talk about it. I just think that from like understanding those two characters and how they think and how they look at the team versus being self-interested, I just thought that was one of the most interesting things about the season.
Absolutely. I will say though, Rob, you got it wrong. It's the Survivor curse of the car.
Curse of the car. Yeah.
Yes. I believe that's the theme for season 41, right?
Yes. The Survivor curse of the car is the reason why they offered her the ability to give 4 cars away. But yeah, and it's two sides of the same coin, which is that like Stephanie is this very, as you said, self-interested player. She makes the selfish decisions, and that's her perception. That's what people give. That's what she gives off to other people. It's why they're so mad at her and not as mad at Rafe in the end. And Rafe is the other side of that, where the perception he gives off is this like, hey, I'm equitable. I'm going to be fair. The reason I'm betraying you is because you've done this, this, and this. The reason Judd is leaving is because of this, this, and this. The reason Cindy is leaving is because of this whole car thing. I mean, really, she really should have done the right thing and given the cars away. But that is ultimately his demise, as well, as he is too equitable and gives away the promise that he had from Danny. And so they both end up losing from these two different perspectives. And they were clashing perspectives, I think, throughout the game, and probably one of the reasons why they were kind of dysfunctional as a duo.
Well, and what I love about Rafe as well is that I think he was the most strategic person on the season, but he was incredibly emotionally driven. This is not I look at the numbers and make a decision. He says, like, I'm getting annoyed with Jamie while playing Moncala, so I'm getting rid of him. I'm starting to get paranoid that Judd is turning on me, so I get rid of him. I'm angry that Cindy didn't give me a car, so I'm getting rid of her. It's so intriguing to me that oftentimes on Survivor, the people that are making these decisions are not the ones that are thinking entirely of the game. You cannot. This is an emotional game. There are flesh and blood players involved. And so the people that are making those decisions are not going to be the Bride and Heidick and say, this is just a business trip. Rafe even has a moment at the merge, right? When he's like, am I part of the axis of evil? You have to wonder if his thoughts about, like, oh my God, what am I doing here? What morality am I sort of instilling on this game? Certainly plays into moves that he makes, unfortunately to his detriment, where he makes objectively bad decisions in favor of sort of catering to his emotions.
Yeah.
And it's this accumulation of power that really accelerates it too, right? Because in the first half of the game, you get a little bit of this, but he's just kind of playing the game like everyone else. It's not until he hits the merge and he has all this power that he starts to say, oh, okay, well, now I'm going to enforce my will, my vision on this game. And instead of, making the strategically correct decisions all the time, he is so confident in his own power in the game, because everything has been going right for him, that he continues to get riskier and riskier with his own vision until the very end, when he takes it a step too far.
Well, and so I think to that point, it shows in Survivor, and I say this out of my butt as, we have an actual Survivor player on the panel, but I do think objectively it is harder to play ahead in Survivor than playing from behind. Where playing from behind is just like, all right, all I need to do is just get another 3 days to survive. But I think playing from ahead, your mind gets so filled with all of these what-if possibilities, and you're just anticipating an attack that might never come, you can become your own greatest downfall. Danny, I think you said Vesepia. I think they're very comparable in terms of they're both incredibly well-equipped defensive players in Survivor. They were both in situations where they're on the bottom and just say, all right, I just need to find my way with one or two people and claw my way from round to round. It's a lot easier to do that, especially nowadays when you have challenges and idols and advantages, than if you are on top and you are, up at night every minute thinking about, okay, who's going to screw me next? Who do I have to look out for? I need to make sure I'm not comfortable right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I had not thought about that too much in context of Survivor recently. That it's fitting that we have Gary Hogaboom here, because I was actually listening to a podcast where they were talking about the now former quarterback of the Jets, Sam Darnold, in terms of that we've only seen him playing from behind, which he happens to not be good at. But what if he was ever playing with a lead? He actually might be okay. And I think that for my own personal style of gameplay, I think that playing from ahead, I have found that I think I have a little more success in that area, where I feel like that's more about sort of just like maintaining relationships, more so than playing from the bottom, which I do not think is something that I found to be an easy thing to come back from. But it is interesting to think about these different players from when they're in positive situations versus negative situations.
Yeah, I think it's at the very least in terms of like how clear your decisions are, right? Like when you're playing from the bottom, you have one clear path in front of you. When you're playing them from the front, I do think it's easier to play from ahead in Survivor and Big Brother, but it's harder to make decisions. It's harder
Yeah,
to make
exactly.
sure that you're doing the right thing. And you're going to be sort of struck by decision paralysis if you're not good at making decisive, choices. And I think probably the worst place to be is if you are playing from behind, but think you're ahead and you're indecisive. That's what we're seeing in Big Brother right now. So that's
Right,
probably
and
worst case scenario.
so to use an example from Survivor Guatemala, it's almost better sometimes to be someone who's like stuck with the baked potato or the fish, because then at least you're making fewer enemies and raking your mind through fewer scenarios. And if you're Judd being like, okay, I have to make decisions for this person, this person, this person, I think it makes the decision matrix a bit easier. But we even see that going back to Stephanie. It also shows, I think, from an editorial perspective, and this is also a huge thing that we see in Big Brother, from a popularity perspective, you can be incredibly popular as the underdog, but when you become the overdog, you can become the biggest villain. Like, it really can be seen. You see it again in Big Brother when power constantly shifts, how much you love somebody when they're a complete underdog, and then they come into power and we hate them. Or vice versa, right? Where like someone starts off, in a huge position of authority, and then they get humbled. And it's like, oh no, king, queen, work your way back. We love you so much. It shows that position can really, really just feed into the idea of popularity. So that's really like first-hand relationship.
And I also think that, Stephanie is probably a great example. That I think there's probably some sort of a gender bias also in there, where I feel like that, a Boston Rob can play from the front and then ultimately not be seen as, sure, there are people that are going to be sick of him running the show, but is going to be seen as almost like Stephanie, like what a 2005 to go from America's sweetheart to, by the end of the year, almost like universally, I don't care for her so much. Like I'm glad she didn't win in the course of 12 months.
Yeah. I mean, it is like you said, they aired back to back and they filmed back to back as well. So this is luckily not like a Russell Hantz Rupert situation where they're filming seasons back to back, but still, wild 365 days for Stephanie LaGrossa. And this was absolutely her Survivor epoch, right? She does return for a brief stint in Survivor 20, where ironically enough, they sort of vote her out for the reason that Jeff Probst implies all the way back in Guatemala, right? Isn't there a tribal council where he's like, Stephanie, here's your challenge record. I'm going to ask you, are you cursed? And I think like a young James Clement is watching that at home and says, all right, years from now, I'm going to vote her out for that same reason.
Yeah, I remember a big narrative at the time being that it got to her head. Like she was popular on her first season, and now she's full of herself. Now she thinks she's God's gift to Survivor.
I'd like to just go back to Rafe and just touch on Rafe's moral compass, which is talked about over the course of the season, not the compass that Brooke knows how to use and Jim also knows how to use. Mike, that I know you've been playing some Dungeons and Dragons lately. Would you say that is Rafe a lawful good character?
I would say chaotic good. Like, I think he's not afraid to cut throats, but he still has a purpose behind it. I do think lawful good would be more so the like, let's stay Nakum strong. Let's pick things off from a very rule binding perspective. But Rafe was sort of writing the rules as he went to say, okay, I'm doing what feels good to me, but what might be good to me is not necessarily good for other people.
Yeah. Taran, I think that a really interesting thing about the season that I also forgotten was about that climactic final 3 immunity challenge. So it comes down to Danny versus Stephanie, and it's like nothing for Danny. Stephanie is like fighting with every ounce of her being to stay in the challenge. Ultimately, she loses. Rafe immediately runs over and tells Danny, I release you from your promise that you don't have to take me. You do it if you want to, but not because of the promise. And that to me, I thought just was so interesting in that Rafe still wanted to go to the final 2. But after watching Stephanie, I felt like that he also wanted to be free of the guilt that he was knocking Stephanie out of the game. Like he wanted to have his cake and eat it too.
And it's such a fitting thing for that to be what gets theoretically Stephanie into the final 2, because it's the same thing that made her so popular in the first place. trying so hard and failing. That's why people loved her in Palau, because she just tried so hard and it didn't go anywhere. She couldn't. In the end, it didn't even matter, and she couldn't make it work. And it's the same exact thing in the final three immunity. You see her struggling on that pole, and she is just like, with every ounce of her being, and you can't help but feel an admiration and a hope that she can somehow make it through. But she can't, and she falls, and she's devastated. And that's why she was so popular to begin with. That's why she was brought back in the first place. And that's what's going to get Rafe to go, you know what? I can't get in the way of this. I can't, in a shady way, get in the way. I need Danny to make this decision, knowing that she's going to choose me, but at least it won't be me that's blocking this, because it's so compelling.
See, that's interesting because, again, this is from Rafe, so this is all hearsay. According to Rafe, he said that he knew he was voted out in third place. He knew that no matter what, that Danny was going to take Stephanie. This absolving of sins almost was a way for him to redeem Danny's image, not Stephanie's. He said that because they made that promise, he didn't want her to come across like she was breaking their word, right? Because she made that promise to him a couple of episodes ago of, I'm going to take you to the final two. And so he felt, okay, I don't want her to come across like a backstabber, because Danny sort of really plays this way of being honest and loyal, which is another advantage of playing from the bottom sometimes. It's like, if you say you have to lie, then you do, because you're from the bottom. Again, everyone's the hero of their own narrative, to quote Stephen Fishback. It's a little weird jutting up to him in the episode being like, wow, I thought that Danny would make this decision. But according to Rafe after the fact, apparently he did this because he knew, I just got Cesternino'd. I'm in third place. Of course, she's taking Stephanie. Stephanie's the biggest goat here. But you know what? I don't want to be a bad person and make Danny look like she's cutting my throat in the process.
Interesting. Well, this is a
You
great
buy that, Rob?
Tease for Talking with T-Bird. We'll ask Danny.
Yeah.
I don't know. Based on what I saw in the episodes, that doesn't strictly mesh with not only what he said, but also his actions in terms of like, well, I mean, I'm definitely voting Stephanie now.
Yes.
How much do you
his
think?
jury question, especially.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much do you think the specter of Ian Rosenberger was over this final three as well? Because let's remember, Ian makes an incredibly dramatic decision at the final three of Palau. I guess he does, Rafe does like the half Rosenberger, where he like says, you don't need to take me to the final two, but he doesn't actually go through and quit the game like Ian does. But I can imagine like he saw maybe that type of thing happen, realize the moral quandary that Ian went through, and possibly sympathize with that perspective as well.
Yeah, interesting. So we'll find out some answers, hopefully, this week about this. And of course, everybody is always going to come across better in their version of the story. Boy, you should hear what Lydia had to say about this all, that she had the game right there.
Well, let's talk about that, because that might be more true than people think.
Yes.
So obviously, I guess if we're working backwards through like bad decisions that Steph and Rafe make, like that's sort of this portion of the podcast, I think one of the most talked about decisions happens at the final four, when it's Rafe and Stephanie making a decision between Lydia and Danny. And on paper, you would say like, get rid of Danny. Lydia can never win a challenge. One of you is going to win. You take each other, and that's that. And so again, this is from Rafe, so take it with a grain of corn, if you will, a kernel of corn. Basically, there were two things in play. One was that Danny was like Elizabeth Filarski level of malnourished by the end of the game in Survivor Guatemala. And you can ask her about this. She like was nearly medevac. We're talking like near Eric Reichenbach and Karamoan levels. And so if you actually put the two up against each other, a normal Lydia is actually about on the same level as a weakened Danny. They did not expect that the final three immunity challenge was going to be broken, in that it's essentially going to become a poll-leaning contest that Danny can easily win. And so you also might think like, okay, from an immunity challenge perspective, women who are lower to the ground with a low center of gravity do a better job balancing, right? We saw that with Kim Johnson. We saw that with Lil. These are what we call squats. So Lydia might be a bigger challenge threat than Danny when it comes to final three. The other element is
not
that,
in that challenge though.
but they don't know that challenge.
I guess so. Lydia, I don't even think that she could reach the rope and the platform at the same time.
No, she needed an apple box for that. But the other element,
longer ropes.
The other element that wasn't really reflected in the edit was that apparently Lydia was like a huge social threat in this game. Like she had this story where she was, an impoverished mom. If she makes it to the end, and obviously not all votes come down to, do you deserve the money? You talked about this last week, Rob, in Survivor Fiji, but Lydia sort of has a story to help bolster that any sort of prerogative people might have, plus the fact that unlike Steph and Rafe, she has not really hurt anyone, with the exception of maybe Jamie, as much as they had. So I do think that they were balancing who was more threatening. But unfortunately, from a storytelling perspective, it seems like Lydia's threat was mitigated when in the moment, I think it was more top of mind for these two.
Well, I mean, the thing is, whether Lydia can beat Rafe in the end or not doesn't matter if he's sure that Danny isn't taking him, right? So it just should come down to challenge performance at that point, if he doesn't think that Danny will take him.
Yeah, I mean, and that's another reason why as well that Rafe, makes that deal with Danny too. It should be noted that despite how in twin paths Rafe and Stephanie are, that Rafe does things that are outside of Stephanie's orbit, namely making this really close bond with Danny that honestly is Danny's most important relationship in the entire game.
Can I add another question? Why does Rafe vote out Cindy at the final 5 if he knows that Danny isn't going to take him to the final 3?
Well, no, at that point...
Because he just didn't give him a car. That was why.
No, well, at that point, Danny is going to take him to the Danny and Steph have that final 3.
Okay. Oh, so the final. Okay, so they have a final 3, but there's not going to the final 2.
Right. At that point, essentially, Rafe made 2 separate final 2 deals with Danny and Steph. Right. Mm-hmm. He basically, so that way he feels like he is the most well insulated. That no matter who wins the challenge, they can take him. But I don't think he necessarily counted on the final immunity challenge being the way that he was. I think he also thinks if I go to the end with Danny and Steph, Danny's knocking on death's door right now. So unless the challenge depends on how tall you are, walk into day 38, the challenge is how tall you are, essentially. And then he realized that he's truly screwed.
Right. And also, this in hindsight, Rafe doing fantastic. Taran, what's Rafe up to these days?
Rafe is the showrunner for the Wheel of Time series on Amazon. He is a huge Wheel of Time fan, as am I. And look, I'm either going to love Rafe or hate him, depending on the quality of this show. So hopefully it turns out well. I'm very excited about it. He's very excited about it. He's been
like
really,
Danny. You might turn on him after a long relationship.
I hope he releases me from my promise to support him in this endeavor. If it turns out to not be great, but he's been doing. He's worked on other shows as well. But this is I think the biggest thing he has worked on, and he's been doing so well to sharing the. Sharing information on social media about it and getting people hyped up about it. And he's been on the top of my list of people I'd love to interview just about Wheel of Time more so than Guatemala.
Yeah. He's been writing in Hollywood for quite some time. I talked to him at the 10-year anniversary. I think he was working on Chuck at that time. So he's been a busy guy. I don't think he necessarily is not eating because of some bad decisions in Survivor Guatemala.
I mean, listen, he ate a lot in Survivor Guatemala, but don't tell Stephanie. I think he was working on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at some point. I mean, Rafe really was the proto Cochrane, right? The super fan that came in. I think he was a wilderness guide when he came into Survivor Guatemala and then said, I want to be a screenwriter, ends up moving to Hollywood, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Both won 4 individual challenges.
That's the thing as well. I really do love that Rafe is sort of the unintentional challenge beast here, because I do feel like, especially the people that go in this middle portion of the game, there is a certain bro contingency of Survivor Guatemala, right? These young athletic males. And I feel like the killer bees. The fun part of the end game is that it ends up being Judd, Rafe and 4 women in the end, and Rafe ends up becoming the challenge beast of the season. As he says himself, I don't think anyone would have expected that going into the season.
Especially given how much Judd really wants to be big man on campus, right? Like,
yeah. Well, let's talk about some of the interesting things from the first half of the game. We spent a lot of time talking about everything that's going on towards the end game, but I think that it's an interesting pre-merge that really sets up a lot of the things that happen. And in my rewatch that I did in the evolution of strategy, I believe Survivor Guatemala is free if people wanted to ever check that out. Chapter 11 of Survivor Guatemala. If you do need a code, ask me on Twitter. I'll look it up after the show. So for Survivor Guatemala, that Mike, one of the things that I thought that was very interesting was I feel like they do not spend a lot of time on the pre-swap versions of the tribes. That I wrote in my notes that this season is like, oops, all challenges. Basically, the whole first episode is a challenge. We get done with that. We're off to the immunity challenge and then tribal. And then episodes 2 and 3, also a reward challenge and an immunity challenge in both of those episodes. I feel like we spend very little time getting to learn the dynamics of pre-swap Yasha and Nakum. And then all of a sudden, episode 4 kicks off and we're out of swap.
Well, yeah. So I would say that one of the really interesting things about the cast of Survivor Guatemala is I think you could take or leave the first 4 boots, but from episode 5 on, every single cast member I think brings it from some sort of perspective, which you cannot say for a lot of other casts. But it comes at the expense of, like you said, from an editing perspective, we sort of yada through these people. And I think the matter is the editing focuses much less on the dynamics of the group and more so on how freaking tough it is to be in Survivor Guatemala. I mean, can we talk about that hike for a second? To start a Survivor season by doing half a marathon, a 24-hour hike through the jungle to start the game of Survivor is still, in my opinion, the most ridiculous thing they've ever done in the history of Survivor to start a season.
Okay. And now, just because they could start a season with that, Taran, should they start a season with an 11-mile hike?
Yes.
Okay, you liked it.
I loved it. I loved this. This was like my favorite thing. When I watched this, I was like, whoa, like they're really putting them through it here. And at the time, I had much less, I like this, you know, the idea of people suffering in the wilderness was like, these people are still TV characters to me. They weren't human beings. And so it was really intense. And Judd he's chopping through the woods. He's a freaking doorman from New York, man. And he's chopping through the woods and there's a predator monkey, and
Blake, predator.
Yeah, and Blake gets hit by a thing, and they have to sleep there overnight. They're doing this hike, and Bobby John goes down, and it's like, what? But he's like the toughest survivor ever. What's happening? And it was such an intense way to start the season. I loved it.
Yeah,
it's epic. I think is the best way to describe it. Like,
certainly,
it is truly epic. I cannot believe that. Like, they technically start Survivor on day 2. It's almost like they have a Blood versus Water-esque day 0 where it's just them walking through the woods. But what I love about it, and what I feel like survival scenes sometimes get understated, especially modern Survivor camp scenes. You can distill a lot about character based on what people do in these wilderness scenarios. Like we see it here, for example, where Gary is going to take charge of Yasha, despite the fact that like he's really trying to obscure his identity. On Nakum, we get the runner of like these glass cannon men, you know, these big, strong, young guys who essentially all end up flat on their back, and how Margaret becomes essentially like the hero of Guatemala in this pre-swap phase, considering that she's not even playing Survivor her first 12 days. She's just trying to help these guys from dying out there in the middle of Guatemala.
Yeah. My complaint here is that if you're going to do this, it should be a 90-minute episode at least, because I feel like that we only had the hike, and then we get to Nakum arrives first. Jeff's like, all right, good job, Nakum. And then he's so rude to Yasha, like only a couple minutes. He's like, I get out of here. Like you go to the other camp. Like, not even like, you know, good job. Glad to see you all made it. He's very hard on them. And then
you guys have failed me.
Yeah, you failed me. and then like everybody's like still dead from the first challenge. And then it's like, yeah, how are we going to have an immunity challenge? Not to mention the oppressive heat, which is like 115 degrees for these players. And now we're going to, run this very physical immunity challenge. It's a miracle we only lost Jim in the first challenge.
Yeah, I'm surprised like Bobby John's arms don't fall off like that one Phil Hartman thing from SNL when he's playing the bodybuilder. I mean,
yeah, steroid Olympics. Yeah,
watching Bobby John have his eyes roll back in his head, I mean, it really predates Russell Swan, right? In terms of like one of the scariest things seen on Survivor, where he loses consciousness. Like we see his soul drift out of that sweet Alabama boy body for a half second before it gets sucked back in those beautiful lips. Like it's wild to, and like Taran said, like this was one of the toughest guy, as Jeff says, like the camp guy to have around for the first 10 seasons, and he nearly expired. What does that say about the rest of you?
Yeah. I loved Judd's premature evacuation from the canoe straight into the mud.
Well, you have to give credit to Brandon, who I think is a very underrated character, who had the line and the great delivery of that. He's I guess you can call it a Judd had a premature evacuation. Judd in the quicksand, in the mud.
Well, because he tries
in
to
the
pull,
damn mud, man.
He tries to pull like a Stephanie from Palau, right? He jumps out of the boat first, being like, "All right, I'm gonna make it to the show," and he's just like. He nearly loses the challenge for his tribe because the tribe's like right there, and he's like, "Damn it, man, I can't get through the mud."
It's like Kathy in the molasses.
Yeah. Oh no, exactly. He'll be adhered to the turf by the end of it. But what I love about it is, despite like Judd is one of the guys to get his bounce back, and he does so just in time to get to this first tribal council, where everything you need to know about Judd Sargent happens here. Where Jeff like asks a question of, how are you guys doing? Judd turns this into like a 30-second shaquilla about how we're going to take the damn ball and drive it down the field, man. We're going to give like 110%, man. You don't think we are going to bring out the Gatorade, man? We're going to do it every time, man. And Jeff just looks at him awestruck that Judd essentially took a crumb and made an entire meal out of it.
I puked and I got up. I did what I had to do. I'm ready to do a backflip, Jeff.
Yeah. Should we talk about Judd here for a minute? Because that Judd, he just brings so much, Mike.
He really does. And he's definitely one of the more boorish cast members. That is to say, I would not say he's like problematically belligerent, but I think that like he's a very fun villain. Yeah. I know he'll just, I'm brutally honest. I'm not a villain.
It depends if you ask Margaret or not.
I guess that's true. But I mean, Judd is just like forget off the handle. There's no handle. It's handleless. That's who Judd is. He's never even seen a handle in his damn life, man.
Except when he's opening the doors.
He's absolutely off the reservation with everything. But the great thing about him and a lot of these people this season is that these do seem like normal people who just are like have a little dial turned in a different direction than maybe the person that you would find off the street. And that's what happens with Judd, that like he's fine most of the time, but then like get a beer in him or claim that he has ADD and he just spirals off in a completely different direction.
Okay, what kind of a thing is that to say about a guy, man? Why he's got no handle, man? Like, why would you say, you go to someone, you say, oh, he doesn't have a handle, man? Like, what the hell, man? What's up with that, man?
And so the Judd, specifically the episode 6 tribal council with Judd versus Margaret is still one of my favorite tribal councils.
It's incredible.
It's incredible, where essentially Judd is trying to prove that he is like not cuckoo by acting cuckoo. By, being like I don't interrupt people. Cindy, do I interrupt people? And then he interrupts her. Rafe, do I interrupt people? And then, of course, the infamous, Margaret came up to me on day 1 and she said, you have ADD. And he starts like pointing off and standing up as if he's lecturing to a crowd that doesn't exist. It's incredible.
The thing that I sort of took away from that on my rewatch here is, they win the reward right before that, where there are some beers consumed. And then also, I think that Judd trades a beer for trades one of his hot dogs to Stephanie for a beer. I'm wondering on a third viewing, is Judd half in the bag for this tribal council?
Well, isn't this also the this is when he goes off about like who took the extra beer?
Yeah.
And it was him. And he's like, oh, whoever did that, man, we're gonna vote you out, man. That's it, man. yeah, I took the extra beer. Like, yeah, I deserve it.
Yeah, we wouldn't want it without me, man.
Yeah, like, yeah, you know what? It's fine if I do it, but anybody else. I mean, this is just the fantastic. I mean, Margaret puts it so well. Judd has a problem with recall. And that shows profusely throughout this episode. Where even when it comes to the beers, he's going to forget that he himself took a beer. But to your point, Rob, I could very easily see that Judd becomes even more belligerent when he decides to imbibe in some drinks. He definitely is in the Don Meehan camp, right? Of like, he definitely imbibed before going to that.
As cited by Don Meehan, not necessarily like Don Meehan.
Yeah, but then of course, there's Judd stuff throughout, right?
Sure.
There's him calling himself King Kong. There's the fact that, he's an instrumental player in the swap phase where it's a 4-4 tribe division and he flips. He completely betrays his old tribe.
Well, that's a great way to go back to where we started with talking about the pre-swap version of the tribes. And so, Mike, I wanted to ask your opinion of, do you think that maybe they don't give us a lot pre-swap because ultimately the pre-swap tribes are not going to matter?
It's a great point because, it really does come down to New Nakum versus New Yasha. I mean, they do end up spending more rounds on those second round tribes than they do the first round. I mean, there's certainly stuff to glean, right? Especially from the Yasha perspective. Like we get a bit of a story with like, we get to see Brian be a bit of a power player where apparently he's the one to really help keep Lydia in the game. So that foreshadows his character a bit. But I feel like the narrative that's been told to us, which is like, yeah, let's get rid of these 3 weak people, and then let's make room for what is far and away the oddest way to ever swap tribes that I have ever seen in the history of Survivor. And then from then on out, it is much more clean cut and much more important to the narrative. So yeah, maybe to your point, they said, let's emphasize these first 3 episodes on how tough things are and some of our more highlighted characters rather than necessarily why Brianna went home.
Yeah, but Taran, I will say that I think that one of the things that is a detriment to like not giving us a lot in the pre-swap version of the game, I do think that that helps prevent the pagonging. Like, for instance, when Gary and Danny go on the reward with Stephanie and Judd later on in the game, and then ultimately Gary doesn't go home that night. It's sort of like that's glossed over that, Stephanie and Gary had a bond from the pre-merge or from the pre-swap version of Yasha, and that we sort of like forgot about that because basically like the new Yasha 4 that come over are so like down and out that it feels like a pagonging. But these characters have relationships from the first 9 days of the game.
Yeah, and I completely agree, and I think it definitely helps the season overall. Although I do think those first, I loved the first episode, loved the hike, but until the swap, even on the rewatch, because like whenever I thought about Guatemala, I would think about Judd and Stephanie and the post merge and the Brian and Golden Boy and the hike and the crocodiles. Couldn't tell you who the first 4 or 5 people eliminated were or what happened in those tribal councils. And on the rewatch, I also was like, all right, so they did the reward. My notes are like, we did reward. Judd has a few quotes. We did immunity. This person's voted out. Until the swap happens, the show really doesn't turn on for me.
Yeah, this is my 3rd time watching Survivor Guatemala. I think I can finally tell you who was on original Nakum and who was on original Yasha.
Yeah, but do you remember their names?
Yes. I wouldn't just describe them.
I don't know. I feel like you could certainly do that with the first 4 boots of this, right? Specifically when it's like younger woman number 1, younger woman number 2, and younger woman number 3 with the law degree who got swap screwed. Like that, unfortunately, they sort of get lumped together in the course of episodes 2 to 4. And you find out behind the scenes there are much more important things as to why they get booted. But I think, unfortunately, to pump up some of their more important, larger characters later on, they sort of give the scraps or not even food to some of these first few
Mike,
boots.
do you have an important reason why one of these early characters got voted out?
I think Rafe said something in his quarantine questionnaire about, I guess, Morgan had sort of like alluded to Rafe that she wanted to get rid of a number from his side. And so like he did this whole hurry up thing right before tribal council where he approached Gary and Brian, etc., about getting rid of Morgan instead of Lydia. So it wasn't necessarily a thing of like, oh, Lydia's weak in challenges, but Morgan is weak at camp. but we know they have to simplify the narratives. But yeah, I do think that the weakest part of these the season is probably its first few episodes, sans that 11-mile hike.
Mm-hmm. And was it poor Brianna that Jamie had to come out and say, like, hey, I like girls who are crazy and pretty, and she's not either.
Yes.
Talk about backhanded compliment.
She doesn't even know what a pick is. So that's like tripped 3 strikes and you're out.
Jamie is also the person who talks about early on how diverse their group is.
Right? And it comes up multiple times. I was like, please stop saying how diverse the Yasha tribe is.
Yeah, Jamie is definitely that guy being like, no, you see how diverse our workplace is? Like, she's a single mom. You know, he sings karaoke. Like
he's a farmer.
We've got a magician's assistant, a fishmonger, a landscaper. Oh boy.
Yeah. So, we also learned a lot about court ball this season, Taran.
Yes, it's very, very, very fascinating.
Very fascinating game of court ball, where apparently it's a game where that the losing team would be killed, and then Mike, sometimes their head would get used for the ball in the next game.
I can imagine from like a purely topographical perspective, heads are not the best for balls. There's certain features that stick out, unless you like want
that's the character of the game, I think.
I suppose so, but it's like using a football as a basketball, right? Like it's going to bounce a little bit wonky, and I guess I guess you're playing on nets if you're doing it like the Maya did, as Jeff Probst would say.
Yeah, very physical game, court ball, and that's I think where Amy ends up suffering this injury. Taran, they couldn't put poor Amy out of her misery here in this season. How many times did she have to compete in challenges on this bad ankle?
Yeah, and she talks too about like I'm not limping, I'm walking normal, so that they don't know how bad this is. And later when she like rolls it again or gets it rolled on, she's like Jeff is like, "Are you good to go in again?" And she's like, "No, but I will." And he's like, "Good."
Yeah, I mean, this is like a pre-Schmergen brawl level of like on workplace injuries. Get so like, all right, I'm gonna wrap it up and then get back in, because there was a lot of like gendered matchups, right? And so there really wasn't a lot of room for Amy to sit out, and so like her ankle could have snapped off and her foot's lying on the court, and she's like, all right, I guess I'll hobble over and continue to push the ball now.
While we're on the subject of like dangerous challenges, also we saw the giant boulder challenge, and Taran, how gross was that afterwards? Is it Brandon who talks about, well, I have some open festering wounds.
Yeah, they're using their shoulder in the I mean, and it's it's rolling in the dirt. And
Bobby John's shirt gets stuck to his wound.
Yeah, his
shirt eating his wound,
fused with the skin of his festering open sore. And again, this was just when I was watching it as a kid, like, oh, cool.
Yeah, well then there's that one point where like Bobby John becomes Aquaman, where he's sitting in the crocodile pool and the fish are eating the skin.
The fish are going at his sore, and he's trying to catch the fish with his mouth as they do it.
I mean, listen, Lydia would approve of that fishing skills. Like, who needs the Hawaiian sling when you've got your body wounds and a mouth?
Because Lydia's fishmonger job was talked about a lot, but they often talked about her with disdain of like, yeah, we got a fishmonger around here.
Well, I mean, if you connect it back to Shakespeare, Rob, I do believe fishmonger was used as an insult to Polonius back in Hamlet. So clearly, well-read Jamie Newton knew his way around a Shakespearean insult or two.
All right. Let's talk about this swap, because it is certainly an interesting one. Taran, is this a fair swap?
I mean, I think it's as fair as any random swap, right? Like, it's kind of random. It's supposed to keep things relatively even, but the tribes were not even at the time, so that's kind of the biggest miss, I would say. But honestly, I kind of liked how brutal and surprising it was.
Yeah. What'd you think, Mike?
this is absolutely bananas. This is ridiculous that we're applying yearbook superlatives that segues into a swap. It's one of the biggest rug pulls I've seen on Survivor in quite some time. But I love it. I mean, I really like watching back Survivor seasons when tribe swaps are not just the random, like, everybody dropped your buffs, because we've seen that so many times. Like in Nicaragua, when they did the apprentice style thing of like, pick 3 people from the other tribe that you want on your tribe. I'd like to hear how they do this whole questionnaire, right? And you think it's sort of like an auction where, Danny and Brian get an apple, and these people get a picnic, and then all of a sudden it just turns into, okay, well, now it's a swap. And the whole irony that, someone like Brian, and I think it was Brooke actually, are the two who have the most.
I think it was Cindy.
Brian and Cindy.
Yeah, they have the most tribe pride, and Brian in particular gets screwed over by having the most tribe pride because he gets swapped into an automatic minority.
Yeah, because he loves Yasha the most. And it was also interesting that the people on the picnic then had their own little summit, Taran, and then they end up coming back to they come home. It's like, oh wait, who are you?
Yeah, and I feel like this was kind of a missed opportunity. I feel like in a modern season they would have used this a little more. But it was such a nonchalant, like, wait, why are you guys here? This is the new tribe. Oh, okay, that's weird. Like that should have been a big moment, right? But it really wasn't.
Yeah, but it's such an interesting smattering of people who end up getting swapped over as well. Again, purely by circumstance. Margaret essentially also ends up signing her own death warrant by going on that picnic, ironically enough, alongside Judd. But it turns out that, like, the entire, young male contingency of Nakum ends up getting swapped over with Danny, which I think is also a very key relationship. Danny, I know, certainly fashions herself like a tomboy, someone who grew up in a family with a lot of guys, was a sports radio host. And you can imagine why that group ends up becoming so tight. One of the many reasons is because Brian's going to make this point, right? That, like, there's a lot of very like-minded people on New Yasha that only ends up through just a matter of circumstances happening to fall in the right direction.
Well, Taran, I think that one of the best things that ever happens to Judd in the game is that next to Jamie, Judd seems like not so rough around the edges.
Yeah, and this is literally, I mean, it's basically what he says. He's like, I don't mind this tribe swap at all. I mean, there was a male testosterone thing going on that other side, but now I'm King Kong. I'm the man of the hour here. Yeah, he finally gets to be the hero that he wants to be, that he said he wanted to be.
Yeah, but then on the other side, then you get, so while Judd comes back to that, you get Amy going like, I can't believe this. We're decimated here. We're gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on the other side of things, that we have this interesting dynamic that I would like to explore when we get the chance to talk to Danny. In these first couple episodes, Danny is she's able to spot, okay, that's Gary Hogaboom that he played at what school is it?
Central Michigan.
Central Michigan. And then no,
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, she brings it up in a challenge, and then Brian just like point blank asks him, "Hey, are you a quarterback? Did you go to Central Michigan?" He's like, no.
Well, no, he does say, I did go to Central.
I did go to
that
school.
There. I did go to. That's weird. I went there, but no, I'm not the quarterback that you're thinking of.
This is one of my favorite runners throughout Survivor history. It's so freaking good. Because, I mean, also another big thing that Survivor brought in Guatemala was sort of like stunt casting. At least like Gary Hogaboom was, I think, the first pseudo celeb to get cast. I mean, Rob, I think you can speak to like whether Gary Hogaboom, especially so many years retired, was that famous.
Yeah. I mean, he is before my time. That I think he was like a NFL player in the 70s. I don't know if there was like anybody can tell us like a modern comp for Gary Hogaboom, but I do think that he was the first person to have some notoriety to appear on the show as like a regular contestant.
Yeah, and this wasn't stunt casting, right? He said he was a big fan of the show, but Gary, as the first celebrity contestant, paves the way for people like Lisa Whelchel to lie about who you are. In comes Gary Hawkins, the landscaper, and it's just such a fantastic recurring
Gary Hawkins!
I will beat you down!
I'm gonna Google you.
It's so good. Like the fact
Yeah.
that Gary keeps the same first name but changes his last name, but still keeps the same first initial of his last name.
Yeah.
Can I just like finish the quote there from Amy, because I did not remember the end of this quote but until I rewatched this. The full quote is, "I will beat you down like a stepchild."
It's like Clay Jordan
Way
energy.
worse. Whoa. Wait a minute. That is not okay. What is happening here?
Yeah. Not ideal. Not ideal.
I'm glad that she never found him then.
So, but the Danny and Gary Hawkins or Hogaboom thing, Mike, she makes such a big deal about it, and then she ends up on the tribe with him. Like, does he ever like take her aside, like, hey, just chill out with the whole Gary Hogaboom thing?
Because remember,
they're allies. They become like the tightest of like they're the only two people left from this group later on. Does he ever like call off the dogs, or does Danny say like, hey, like all right, I won't bring this up anymore?
No, I mean, Gary, remember in his final words, like, I'm especially proud of the fact that I never said who I was and nobody caught on to me. It has come out after the fact that everyone caught on to him, but Gary is insistent that he kept the guys up. And so to that point, I think it was this
he was
thing
the
where
invisible quarterback.
Yes. Yeah, it was like the Emperor has no clothes, where Gary's like, oh, I'm definitely not a quarterback. And Danny's like, sure, you're not, wink, wink. So I think she knew the entire time. But it's a great point, Rob, that these two end up being the final two from that new Yasha tribe, and it's the person that she calls out in the second immunity challenge of the season.
Yeah, she said in a confessional, she was like, well, I guess he doesn't want to admit who he really is, so I mean, I guess I'll just leave it.
Yeah.
And also, I also love Gary's logic too. I think he says in the beginning of the season of like, well, if they ask me what I did 15 years ago, I just won't say anything. Like, I guess Gary is getting away with that. And that I don't think a topic of conversation with icebreakers in the first few days of Survivor is like, hey, just want to know, what were you doing 15 years ago? Just curious.
It's also ironic that Gary is the one to complain about the starstruck nature of Stephanie in the season, when he could have maybe used a little bit of that himself, right?
Yeah. Maybe if there was any like Green Bay Packer fans that were out there in that season. I don't know.
No, yeah, I don't think there was any major Midwesterners. I think it was like a relatively like Midwest, South, and East Coast season.
Okay. So over the course of the swap, Judd flips instantly. I think this turned out to be a good move for Judd, Taran, right?
It's probably, I don't think he had a lot of respect on the other side. And he had at least a bit of a chance there on the new side, especially given, I think his personality meshed a lot more with them anyway. He's not a damn worry in the world for me. I'm one of the big guns now. And yeah, he's this is a much better place for him.
Yeah, Mike, we never really get to hear about Margaret's sort of like long-term plan, but it does seem like it is possible that she had an idea about some version of Nakum going far that was going to be with her and Brooke and Cindy and maybe Danny.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine that, again, while the guys were flat on their backs, I could imagine that, like, having to essentially serve by their side to nurse them back to health probably brought these women together in a certain way. Not to mention that due to Bobby John coming onto their tribe, they were initially outnumbered 5-4. And so this could be like a Hunapu situation, right? Where like Jim's voted out and now they're like, okay, now we can come together and take control of the tribe. But I totally agree with Taran that, again, Brandon, Blake, Bobby John, the 3 Bs, they were all sort of cut of the same cloth, or at least, talking John Deere and praying before getting to their corn. That's not necessarily Judd. So when like Stephanie, New Jersey girl, walked into his life, he's like, oh, great, I found my people, man.
And
Bobby John and Blake have their first strategy conversation on the swapped tribe.
Yes.
As they are going to the bathroom together.
There's no urinal etiquette. They're like 2 feet away from each other. But I think it makes sense, right? Because they're confirming that they're each other's number one while doing a number one.
I'm just like, how did this shot happen? Right? Like the cameraman surely was not like, oh, let's follow you guys to the bath.
Karen,
Surely
this happens on Big Brother, right? That they don't turn the camera on in the bathroom until two people are talking strategy in there. You know the rules.
But I mean, Rob, correct me if I'm wrong. If you go say like, "Hey, I'm gonna go," you take an aqua dump. The cameraman's not like, "Oh, let me follow you. I'm gonna film you do it." Surely they had to be like, "Hey, we're gonna go talk strategy while we do this. Come film us."
But if two people co-aqua dump, I don't know what they do in that situation. I do think it's more of a thing where I feel like the women Survivor players might end up going off together, and I don't feel like that the cameras ever follow them. But maybe, and I think that a lot of the camera people on Survivor are typically men who are out there in that job. Maybe they felt like, okay, these two guys are going to talk strategy and are using the bush urinal. All right, let's roll on this.
This is what I'm saying. This was premeditated by Bobby John and Blake. They were like, "Let's go take a piss, talk some strategy. We want to make this happen. This is a prime opportunity for this talk to happen."
And it makes sense. When is a man most vulnerable? When he's at the urinal. Like, you know, like you are really, I think, exposing a person down to their parts when their parts are in use.
Yeah.
And so I think at that moment, it's like, okay, you know what? Blake's not going to give me any sort of BS here, right? We're just two guys here being vulnerable from a certain perspective. I think we see a new side of each other now as we affirm our deal that Bobby John doesn't go back on, but you know, it'll get broken later on.
The mafia boss orchestrating a deal in the sauna, like
exactly.
But then they go for a handshake right after also. It's not even enough that they're talking.
Rob,
it's the deal.
It's Survivor. I mean, look at the open, festering wounds that are on their back. You think you're worried about a little bit of pee on your hands?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, what is to be like, oh God, oh please, no, don't shake my hand. Now let's please get back to our dirt pile in the corner of the middle of the jungle. But please,
the
do
worst
not
thing
shake
is
my
this.
hand.
This isn't even the worst bit of like gross hygiene because Judd is going to throw up in the shelter later in the season.
Yeah, he said that wasn't him.
I'm sorry, I forgot it wasn't.
Oh yeah, and they really didn't have to show like the shot of that as well. Like we can put two and two together. We don't need the actual picture.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that some of the more interesting post-swap votes then come from on the new Yasha side, where they're going to go for a couple of tribal councils here in a row. Where we talked about the one Margaret one in the double episode when they have to go, but that was pretty straightforward after they went out Brooke. So Bait Blake, greatly set up there by Brian Corridan. Mike, do you have any insight into what really happened here? Was Bait Blake successful? Why did Nakum, with the exception of Brandon, turn on Blake at this point?
I don't think Bobby John turns on. Oh no, but yeah, Bobby John does join.
He apologizes to Brandon after.
Yeah, he does join them. I mean, I really think
he was upset about the handshake. I don't think he wanted the handshake. Is the problem?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Blake had pee on his hand, and I did not respect that.
No class.
No class. But I really do think that like it was a manner of. I mean, I feel like the three former Yashas really endeared themselves to the Nakum people. And again, this is a season about relationships over strategy. And I think that goes a long way. That if they're starting to get tired of Blake, let's remember that this Nakum tribe also didn't go to tribal council for a long time, right? They got rid of Jim pretty easily. But in that time, Blake has recovered. He's become a bit more himself, which apparently is like a braggadocious
golden boy with his golden hair.
He comes
his
down
girlfriend
with the spear, with the double D's. I mean, you could hear Jordan Kalish now like laughing back in New York while we're talking about this. Yeah, I don't have too much behind the scenes info on this, but I wonder if it just came down to Danny never really vibed with Blake. Maybe that's another thing going back to like the Nakum women had a deal that Danny just never really felt Blake out. And Bobby John, just wanted to go where the votes were going. And he's played Survivor before. He more so than Brandon is fine with, betraying his word.
But Taran, in hindsight, I feel like this is such a bad move. Amy, at this point, she already has the ankle injury. They need the strength to beat. Now both tribes are going to go to tribal council in the next vote. but ultimately at the vote where Brian gets voted off, that potentially, I think that's a close match there. I think that maybe there's a chance where they end up potentially winning immunity.
I agree. Yeah. And it definitely, it felt to me like this was a big error for Danny, because it seemed like this was Danny's call. It felt like, it was pitched to Bobby John. Bobby John wasn't into it. It was pitched to Danny, and Danny was like, oh, I find myself as the swing vote here. And that Danny is likely the one that got Bobby John on board. And that's kind of like how it happens, right? At least that's how it appears in the edit. And maybe they're just trying to give her any credit for any move because she ends up winning. But I don't know if this is the move that I would want to give her credit for, because it definitely doesn't seem like it's the right move given what we've seen and what happens with the tribe, and the fact that they do end up going into the merge without the numbers, which under most circumstances means that they've lost at this point in Survivor history.
Yeah. I mean, can we talk about the challenges in this episode as well? Because both of them are pretty incredible. First is the infamous challenge that, John Kierhofer was like throwing his hat down in rage, right? Where this is the like cut the rope and then chop through the log and then bring up the minecart. But one tribe doesn't get to do all that because Jamie can't cut the rope, and it creates like the biggest blowout, I think, in Survivor history, where one tribe goes through the complete challenge before someone even finishes a stage of it. But this really begins, again, another one of my favorite storylines in Survivor, the Bobby John Jamie rivalry, right? This is the episode with "Who's smiling now?" and then Bobby John going "Rah!" in response.
Yeah. What do they say after the challenge? They're like, boy, Bobby John is really losing it out there.
Yeah, but again, like when Bobby John, that's who he is, right? It's just like as soon as the challenge bell rings, he's gonna throw his legs into the air, he's gonna scream, and you find out a little bit more about how Jamie and Bobby John, I guess there's an Alabama-Georgia rivalry that predates them. They're like the Hatfields and the McCoys of Survivor Guatemala. But this is the beginning of these two guys in particular just hating each other's guts for the duration of the game.
Yeah.
And it like culminates in them. I don't even know what they were doing after the reward challenge, but they just start like, I called it quacking. And it was very strange.
Like bum fights.
Yeah, like was it Team World Star, like the people that film other people
World
fighting?
Star Hip Hop, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's odd, and it's I think the closest we've ever come to like somebody knocking someone out in a Survivor, where they're pushing, is that the ball pushing challenge, right? Where Amy's ankle goes flying off into another country, and like Jamie wins and starts hollering, and then Bobby John starts chest bumping with him like it's Willie Hance and Chef Joe, and then Bobby Johnson's going like, "That's what I like. That's what I like." I think he's supposed to be sarcastic, but you can't really be sarcastic when you're like exonerating all that male testosterone, as Judd would say.
The male testosterone, yeah.
Yeah. Jamie and Bobby John rivalry is a good one. I also like that Jamie, when he loses these challenges in a blowout, Taran, he wants to continue. No other Survivor has ever want to do this. So I'm like, no, we're finishing.
I mean, no, it's look, he's just trying to have a Suri moment before the Suri moment ever happened, right? Yeah, he just it happened with the rope, right? He was just like chopping and chopping. He's like, no, I'm gonna do. You want me to give up? You want to give up? Is that what you? He's like, we lost, dude.
And then he finishes and he goes like, all right, guys, we're gonna keep going with this. They're like, no, they're like on the way to the pool right now, Jamie. And it happens on the post merge as well, right? When they're like, oh, we lost, and Sydney's like, we lost, Jamie. Stop it. And Jamie's like, no, I can't give up. I got to keep going. Yeah. Again, Jamie, what a weird water ski instructor that man is.
I mean, he says us Southern people are crazy. It's like, I don't know.
But is he pretty?
Brandon ends up just smoking him in that challenge to the point where when they do Fallen Comrades at the end of the season, that Danny says, Brandon, wow, he could really cut a rope.
That was the proudest moment on the show. He was so happy about it.
He demolished that rope like it was licorice.
Mhm.
Brandon, really underrated character. I also love going back to the Bait Blake stuff where Blake's like, yeah, me and Bobby John are ass kind of guys. Like, what? And he's telling the Double D story. He's like, what do you think, Brandon? And Brandon's like, what do I think about novelty-sized boobs? I don't know. I'm not a big fan of them, Blake. Brandon was, like you said, Rob, a very underrated confessional giver. He was very snarky.
Yeah, it was really good. So we get the double episode where Margaret goes. The tribal council where Brian goes is also very odd. Where I'm not sure that Taran, do you think this was because Rafe was sitting there that they were like, or they're gonna keep their cards very close to the vest? Were they concerned Brian had the idol? The idol isn't even in the game. So
right. And they didn't know that Rafe was going to be giving somebody immunity, I would imagine, but it felt like they did because it felt like they intentionally misdirected so that Brian wouldn't get the immunity. But I don't know exactly what it was, but it definitely felt like they were trying to trick Rafe.
Well, yeah. So, I don't know if Rafe was tricked though, because Rafe has come out to say that he and Brian were never on the same page. And Brian has also admitted this, that he and Brian almost felt in competition with each other as like the young super fan archetype. They were sort of like the Adam Klein and Nick Wilson, right? Of like, only one of us can survive. There can only be one in this Highlander scenario. And so Rafe was never going to give immunity to Brian. So if they were trying to set up a smoke screen, they didn't need to make the smoke. They didn't even need to build the fire because there was no way that Rafe was going to give Brian immunity in the first place.
Because they hype up Brian so much of this tribal council, and Jeff asks Bobby John, like, Bobby John, what do you think about Brian? He says, well, Jeff, you need a kamikaze to bust a wedge. That's your guy. And Jeff's like, excuse me? Yeah, kamikaze to bust a wedge. He's a great neighbor. Be a great neighbor to have also.
Yeah, he's a kamikaze to bust a wedge. Man, this is part 2 tribal as well. This is after the Judd is not a bad sportsmanship ADD tribal as well. Which also comes. This is a great episode because
it really is.
This is also the Rafe has the immunity because Judd figured out the word scramble.
Ancient ruin, man. Ancient ruin.
Gave him the answer.
Yeah.
Judd won the challenge. He just couldn't figure out the damn puzzle, man.
I didn't know I was that smart, man. Next time I gotta keep my mouth shut, man.
Yeah, but you brought up a great point, Taran. I totally forgot that the Margaret Tribal Council is also I'm not a damn sportsmanship, man. I didn't even think I was a damn sportsmanship. You keep calling me a damn sportsman? Bad damn sportsmanship?
You told me I had ADD. What kind of don't ask me such a stupid question.
But so Brian is a really big part of this pre-merge, and I think we'll find out, I guess, later in the survey whether or not he is the Kelly Wentworth Award. But I think when people ask, who's a pre-merge player that should get brought back, I feel like unfortunately due to the forgetfulness of Guatemala, I feel like someone like Brian can often fall off the table there. But I feel like he's someone, and he is hungry to come back. He definitely showed a lot of strategic chops. We were led to believe that he was the one that was able to keep himself in the game with the Bait Blake stuff. It just became a matter of like, because they had to go to tribal council and Gary and Amy were more than happy to move forward without him, almost at their own expense. They were fine cutting him loose here.
Yep. He is certainly young enough when he played. What is he? Probably 21, 22 when he went out to go play 22. And so certainly still able to go out there. A kamikaze to bust up a wedge. A platinum one at that.
Brian was my favorite when I watched the season the first time. He was the Rob Cesternino of this season that I was like, oh, I want him to do well. And I was really heartbroken when he went home. And I always wanted him to come back. Nobody comes back from Guatemala except for Danny very recently, right? So I don't know, maybe someday.
I think then the merge, pre-merge, and then we have a couple of strong boots, especially in that double episode. But then I think that last vote before the merge, might kind of a snoozer on the Amy boot episode.
A snoozer in terms of the intrigue, but not a snoozer in who we lose. If you ask me, who are the pre-merge boots to bring back? I would say like Tracy Hughes Wolf from Micronesia. You can certainly put Brian in there. But I love me some Amy O'Hara. Amy O'Hara is
she sparkles.
She's such a great character. She is so like OTT, but not necessarily in a camera hoggy way. That just seems to be her personality. She was always the great sounding board to go to, whether she's talking about like, oh, the beetle landed me like on a freaking helicopter, or her talking about how much she was like a fish out of water, as Lydia would say. And the fact that she was able to thrive here and really only didn't make the merge because her tribe happened to lose here, and just because they didn't know how many more challenges they would have to go through, and Amy was obviously the weak one here. It was really sad to see her go. You could feel a family breakup, but Amy is just such a fun character. She definitely seemed like sort of like the Elaine Stott type, right? Like the person that always had people busting up at camp, and she had us busting up at home as well.
Yeah, she's good in the reunion show also. Taran, this episode also features perhaps one of the more unusual moments in the history of Survivor. We get a moment where the new Yasha tribe shows up at Nakum on the boat. And hey, guess what? It's Danny's birthday, and you are all invited to a pool party at Yasha. Danny loves parties. Thought that they would be great. Why doesn't Nakum? Why don't you come to my birthday party?
I love this. This is, again, it's such a unique feature of Guatemala. And not only is it like this cool inter-tribe pool party, but there's a pool. I talked about this a little bit, but I love that the waters are so dangerous that they need this sort of like enclosed pool area in order to go into the water. And this is where they hang out. It's such a great visual. I love that Jamie is like, I don't want to be here. They're the enemy.
He's the parent, right, at the pool party, being like, all right, it's time to go home. I want to leave.
Yeah.
We just got here. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's so, and they're offering them their extra chocolates.
Not the chocolate not melt in the 115 degree heat.
The Mayans perfected that formula to a T, Rob.
I like Brandon's like, looking at the muddy ground is making me sick. I've eaten too much chocolate. It's too much.
And that's another, again, fun little incorporation of the Mayan culture of just being like, the Mayans are known for a lot of things, but one thing they're really known for is chocolate. So you're going to gorge yourself Willy Wonka style. But that pool party scene is even when Bobby John becomes like the history professor for a moment, right? Being like, in ancient Mayan days, warring tribes came together often to party with each other. Like, he just suddenly brings in, I don't know if this was fed to him or if he read up on the culture prior to coming in. I didn't know Bobby John knew this much about the Maya.
I think the former.
Fed to him like chocolate. I agree with Taran. I love this scene so much. It is so rare that we see this, right? Like, we're going to get this. We're going to get Ozzy and Cowboy and Flicka accidentally walking over to the other tribe's camp in Cook Islands. But I feel like maybe somewhere around Heroes versus Villains, they like keep the tribes enclosed and don't allow them to explore. So I will say thank you to production for allowing this to happen. Yeah,
Mike, do you have any backstory on this? Because this comes across as like super contrived to me. Like to me, I don't like can't imagine where like say like in any of the Survivor seasons, all two of them that I've been on, there was never they were like, oh, let's go visit the other tribe. Like, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
And like, hey, all right, we're leaving. We're gonna go check out the other tribe's camp. We're gonna go see if they want to come here today. All right. Like, production has to sign off on this. Like, and it seems to me like this has to be a production idea.
See, I kind of thought like this felt like a very Danny thing to me, that she would be like, hey, production, can we invite the other tribe over to have a pool party for my birthday? I like birthdays. I like parties. I would like for this to happen. And they were like, why not?
Yeah, I think from a production standpoint, if they ask that, and there's going to be drama, right? Because like the sad sack Debbie Downers in Nakum, who ironically enough are living it up much more than Yasha, are now going to come over. Like, that makes for great TV. And Survivor producers are going to say, whatever makes great TV, we're going to go with it. I mean, to your point, Rob, I certainly think if you had suggested back in Survivor Amazon, let's go visit the girls, maybe they'd be more into it. Maybe it's just that nobody came up with a suggestion at that point.
I mean, it's also like we don't know where their camp is. Like it is like the survivor camps are not like necessarily like across the street from each other. Like a lot of
Mhm.
times, like you have to be taken like you get in a boat and then you are taken on a boat to another boat that looks like the boat that you got in the first place. So like production has to be like very much on board with this. And to me, I'd like to ask Danny about this because this feels like a thing where it's like, all right, well, you just let's just tell them it's your birthday, and that's a reason why we have sort of like a pre-merge sort of meetup.
Let's just make up a birthday.
Well, I think it might have been her birthday,
yeah.
and that's what they just ran with that.
I don't know. I mean, again, if Survivor now could allow these constraints in production, I'm assuming they're even more so locked down due to COVID. But I wonder if how people make up family members, kids in the case of Australian Survivor, like could you make up a birthday, then make up a birthday party to sort of parlay relationships with the other tribe as well?
Well, I mean, Cochran did make up a birthday in South Pacific, so that this would just be one step after that. I don't know if anybody researched when is Danny Boatwright's birthday. Was it during the filming of Survivor, or did she have a fake birthday?
Or you could say, like, it's going to be my birthday, and also I want a party as well. Like, oh, can you make a piñata? Can you call in all the tribes over? We'll take a break from the scheming and plotting. And knowing production, they're going to hide an advantage in that piñata, you know? So it's going to become the most high-stakes game of piñata yet.
Yeah, Danny's birthday...
Yeah,
July 13th.
July 13th.
So I think that does sound like that would be in the production schedule. Yeah. Okay. And then we go from the vote with Amy of then it's like, okay, well, just go tell the other tribe that it's a merge.
Yeah.
You already went over there. You know the way. You went there a day ago. Now go and say you live there now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kind of a uneventful merge to like, hey, guess what? Hey, everybody wake up, you're merged.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
it's just like, all right, well, okay.
Yeah, well, it's also they're not going. Well, they're going to do the twist on the feast, right? Because maybe that's another reason why is because they wanted to do the eat or play stuff, which I believe is the first time we get that advent in Survivor. That they wanted to save that big twist for the challenge. So they're like, okay, we know we can't do a feast, so how can we do an unconventional merge? Let's just send them on our behalf to make the announcement for us. Here's a box of red buffs. You do the rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're also, this is the introduction of the immunity idol that is going to be hidden in the forests somewhere.
We haven't talked about this yet. So, all right, the hidden immunity idol is here, and it does provide for some intrigue here. Taran, what do you think of the first debut of the hidden immunity idol?
I thought it was kind of a fun little. It was kind of like a bonus life at this point, right? And it's one thing. It's clearly pretty difficult to find. Rafe is accidentally putting his hand in hornets' nests, and it takes multiple rounds for anybody to find it. Once they get a clue, or are able to intuit what the clue actually was. And I also like that they did not show the finding of the idol. I wish that they had stuck with this instead of the massive idol hunt find segments that we get nowadays that are far too common. I think in today's Survivor, I think it was a lot of fun as an introduction for the immunity idol.
Yeah, and they did show Gary's finding it in the reunion show.
Yes, eventually they did.
Yes, so it's not like they didn't have footage of it, like maybe with like Amanda, because that's the only other time really with Amanda was when we haven't seen someone actually find the idol. I agree. I mean, I love this way of storytelling where we're not necessarily in the know of everything. There's still some intrigue to us of like, oh wait, do they have the idol? We're not entirely sure, and then they pull it out, so it surprises us as well. I think, unfortunately, it's impossible to do now because idols and advantages are such an integral part of the game to the point where there is a lower third that describes what everyone has. That I think, unfortunately, they have to keep everyone abreast as to what advantages each and every person has so they can figure out the votes that are going on. Yeah. Otherwise, from a storytelling perspective, I love it. And I think what also helps this iteration of the idol is that it's found and played in the same episode.
Yes.
Right. Like,
well, I think you could do this still in episodes where it's like, hey, if I don't find the idol before we get the tribal council, like I'm done for tonight. I just got to keep looking. And then, sun is setting. I better hurry. Go to tribal council. And then, but in the episodes where people don't play the idol, I think it sort of then takes away from the storytelling of what we're able to figure out. Like if somebody got voted out with an idol in their pocket, you wouldn't even know until they said, I had an idol in my pocket. Like, oh my God. So if it's like found and played all in the same episode, like that Amanda moment also, like I think you still could do this.
Yeah, I mean, they could also. I mean, we this is an old conversation at this point, but they could take from the Genius and do flashbacks, right?
Right. They did that with Dan, I think, in the premiere of Survivor David versus Goliath.
And kind of like and like I think even like a multi-episode sort of storyline of a flashback, if it plays out in the right way, to have a majority alliance thinking that they've got everything under control, and then an idol is played and you flip it back and there's they found it and they made it some sort of resistance, and I think that could be fun, but it's definitely not in line with the structure that they've gotten used to over 40 seasons. So
Mike, could we talk about the rules of this first hidden immunity idol and how it was used by Gary?
Yeah, I mean, so this was essentially like a bonus immunity necklace where it's not, we really get the spectrum of powers with the idol in the teens, right? We're like, first, it's really not that powerful, even though this does end up saving Gary here, because you can only play it before the votes are cast. So it's going to be, Jeff's going to ask, hey, are you giving up that immunity necklace? And then if you have to play the immunity idol now, do so before when anyone even gets up to vote. And then we're going to swing all the way over to you can play an idol after the votes are read. And so you basically get a second chance in the game, really the bonus life that Taran's talking about in 12 and 13, before finding that happy medium in 14. And so that's the other thing as well, is that like compared to the strategic ramifications that the other idols are going to show, it saves Gary that round, but it really isn't like a huge impact. It's not like a live tribal council now where everyone's whispering like, oh my God, what do we do now? What should we do? There was clearly a contingency plan where Bobby John goes, but the sequence of events that leads into it is so fun, right? Where Judd gets the clue says, look in a tree. Judd says that he decides, okay, I'm going to finally lie in this damn game. But the lie he comes up with is probably one of the worst lies in Survivor history, where he says, I'll tell you one thing, it's definitely not on the ground. It definitely not there. Or no, it's definitely on the ground.
Definitely is on the ground. Yeah.
When it comes to keeping a secret, man, I can't do it. He's got to tell Steph. He's like, I can't say too much. But what I can say, definitely on the ground. Definitely. Right. Which is immediately preceded by Stephanie saying the clue didn't say much other than the fact that it's somewhere in the trees. Like it's not on the ground, and just it's definitely on the ground. And then he's out there looking up. For the
and that's how Gary finds it, right? He sees Judd looking up at trees, so he goes to like significant looking trees. And you know what? We talk all we want about Russell Hantz found an idol without a clue. Gary Hawkins did it first. Let the history books show. Gary Hawkins found an idol, played it when he needed it. But I like the fact that also not only was it like expended early on, because I do think from a narrative perspective, these two episodes kind of focus a lot around the idol, right? Of like, let's look for it. Who has the idol? I think that would have gotten a little tiring if it hadn't been played until like the final 6 or 5. So I'm very happy the idol gets expended early on as well.
Yeah. And I think they do make the adjustment because that, Gary plays the idol. It's like, oh, can't vote for Gary tonight. All right. So now, okay, the votes end up shifting to Bobby John on that vote. I think that what they really wanted was Jeff counts the votes, and then we see somebody, okay, that person would have been voted out, but they get to stand up and have that like bigger pop at tribal council. Aha! You thought you could vote me out, and now you can't. And you don't get that with this version of the hidden immunity idol.
Well, that's what they tried with that Rafe thing, right? Like they did that weird thing where Rafe gave immunity before the votes were cast left. And then Jeff says, well, Brian, technically you're voted out, but let's see if Rafe
got one last chance.
Exactly. So that was almost the first version of the God idol that we're going to see in the next season of you can be protected after the case. I also like the fact that we talk about immunity idols through the years. This one is what, like a 6-inch stone statue is the very first immunity idol.
Yeah,
it's just a legitimate idol.
Mike, just to go back to that, Rafe gets to pick who gets immunity in that spot. Jeff did describe the immunity decision was going to be Rafe's choice.
I know, I noticed that too, and I absolutely love it. It's like maybe that was stuck in my gray matter that allowed me to come up with that phrase like 7 years ago. That Rafe's choice did indeed exist in Survivor Guatemala.
So let's talk about the reward challenge that ultimately leads to Judd getting the damn clue to the idol, because this is a very fun one that they did versions of this in earlier seasons, notably in Survivor All-Stars. I do think that they lose something in having it go by the placement of who launched their arrows as opposed to Judd picking who gets what, but it sets up a really interesting reward challenge. First off, Mike, we get to see Pepito and her puppies.
Yes, exactly. They live here. Jeff establishes. Also, the reward challenge is one of those classic old school Survivors, like wield a weapon. We already got that with the Mayan war clubs that you had to throw like 50 yards. That Gary is like, oh, I can't do that. I've never done that in my life. Please sit me out of the challenge. So, and here we get what I think the Atlatl, I believe is the name of the little like arrow throwing thing that they get to use.
Little arrow
lawn dart.
Yeah, it's basically a lawn dart. Not to anglicize it particularly, but yeah, Judd wins here, and I do agree that ordinarily, because the one that Rupert won in All Stars, right, was like he got to pick who got what. Big Tom was pissed when he got stuck with the baked potato or the ham sandwich or whatever. Yeah, in comparison to everybody else. But here it's due to placement, and honestly, there wouldn't be drama if not for what Jamie does, because what we sort of skipped over is that the Eat or Compete challenge happens at the immunity challenge in the previous day, and basically not only does Jamie and a bunch of the Nakums sit out, but Jamie sort of taunts Bobby John in particular, really trying to psych him out basketball style. Bobby John is not happy about it, and neither is anyone else. Basically, everyone calls him an asshole after the fact for what he did.
No class
bad
at all.
Sportsmanship. Yeah.
Don't tell me I got no class.
Yeah.
And Rafe is of course very upset with Jamie. How could you do it? Rafe, who has right at the start of the merge, they set up this Rafe storyline. This is when he calls himself the Axis of Evil. He doesn't like, and this is the fun thing about Rafe. He recognizes that this is a social bonding exercise and that it's strategically relevant, that they're bonding over their bashing of the other players to unify. But he doesn't like it. It makes him feel icky. And Jamie is making him feel icky. And so he is like, I don't know if I can play this game with this guy. And so Jamie feels he's clearly been talked to, and he feels like he needs to make up for his behavior. So he gives up his own spot in the reward.
Yeah. And it's also a good point because even earlier that day at camp, right, the Yashas, they're coming home to the Nakums. So the Nakums are like, you're our new boarders now. Welcome to our home. And the Yashas are kind of like the help. Like they're saying, okay, we want to put in a good word, so we're going to haul all this wood. And the Nakums are saying like, ha, 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 thanks for bringing us doing our chores, but we're still going to vote you out. Like they really, this merged episode in particular really vilifies basically all the Nakums, maybe sans Rafe, who is like the sole voice of reason. It really sets up this idea of here are our hero Yashas and the Cinderella Yashas and the ugly stepsister Nakums who have them do their chores and they can't even go to the ball of the jury. You know, poor Brandon is left behind.
Ball.
Yeah, exactly. The ball that they run into. And so to that point, Jamie is a complicated character. So even when he gets called out and Bobby John, you know, does his like, come on, gosh, stop it at the tribal council, the next day he's like, all right, I feel bad about it. Yeah. You know, I want to be a good sportsmanship, so I'm gonna give away my meal.
Well, I feel like that probably the best comp for Jamie out of these seasons that we've rewatched is probably Brandon Hance in Survivor South Pacific, who also would have like moments of like fits of rage, and then also would go into like head down, like, oh, I'm so sorry, I have to make up for it. Like I've like been a bad person. I need to do what's right. I need to be a good gentleman. I need to like try to make up for this. Yes, sir. No, sir. And so that is what he does at this reward challenge, where he basically gives himself last place.
Yeah. And the thing that you kind of learn, you're like, oh, look, like Jamie seems to be aware of his own sort of place here. But then sort of after this, Rafe says in the confessional, it's just because he's paranoid. He's just, he didn't give his reward up because he wanted to make up for his behavior. He's giving his reward up because Jamie is so paranoid that his alliance is going to turn on him. And I think, to be fair to Jamie, calling him paranoid is a little bit of a disservice, considering they are wanting to turn on him.
Yeah.
Well, which came first, the cursed chicken or the egg, Mike?
Exactly. But don't eat it either way. I mean, it's also an interesting case too, in that what Jamie does is actually kind of reflected in the Cindy stuff too, as well, right? Or even stuff going back to Survivor Karamoan with what Brenda does with the family reward of like, even when you are making emotional decisions in the game, when it comes to these creature comforts, people might take it for strategic value, where Jamie might be like, I'm, repenting for my sins. Give me the cold water. Nothing tastes better than my self-respect. But even if you're coming from the best place in your heart, someone still might look at you and be like, oh, I see you trying to strategically wield this. Like you're just thinking about the game at all times. So it might be completely misconstrued just due to the nature of the game.
I mean, that's basically a Survivor in a Ramon nutshell, because I mean, going back to even, earlier than this, like people do something nice. Matthew gave everybody our loved ones visit in the Amazon. And I was like, oh, we got to get rid of him because now everybody likes him too much through like the modern seasons of, people getting voted out who win the loved ones challenge, like Ron Clark and people like that. So there is no good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah. And this is another great opportunity for a Judd moment, though. Judd is the king of the table. He even gets his own little it's Judd, Stephanie, and Bobby John's weird polyamorous wedding, and they get to sit at the separate table and imbibe on steak and lobster and drink to their heart's content, to the point where Bobby John and Judd attempt to move a stump in the middle of the night. And it's absolute like drunken gloriousness that we don't see often on Survivor, sans some Carl in Survivor David versus Goliath.
Yeah, and Judge just like I don't remember any of that, man. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't throw up in the shelter.
It's not a lie if you can't remember it.
Yeah, they also get cigars. Also, I cannot think of another time I've seen Survivor players smoking cigars. Jervis in Borneo.
Yeah, I mean, Shane's gonna get about like 13 cigarettes in his mouth at once in next season, but I don't think he's been smoking a stogie.
Yeah, so all right, that's just a really fun scene, and then we see Judd getting very sick. Also, Taran, do you like Gary Hawkins / Hogaboom just giving people the death stare? Evil eye.
Of course.
I'm just enjoying. Yeah.
Just enjoying my slice of pizza.
Just enjoying watching you eat. That's it.
It's so funny because I can see Gary being on a normal season of Survivor and doing well, and I feel like he had that potential, and he wanted to just be the landscaper who was just who played this sort of more straight-laced game, and he finds himself not in real Survivor, but in Twilight Zone Survivor, which is Survivor Guatemala, with Judd and Jamie and Stephanie, and he's just like, where is this? Well, maybe I should have been a quarterback. I don't even know anymore.
Yeah, maybe in changing his career path, he almost put things on a different timeline for himself now, right? We're like, okay, well, now you're going to be on the Survivor season full of the fishmonger and the water ski instructor and the magician's assistant. Such a diverse season you're going to be a part of, Gary Hawkins. But were you Gary Hogaboom, you would get the most normal cast possible, but this is your fate now.
Um, the tribal council in that episode is also a good one. Talking about like the lying in Survivor, and this happens a couple times in the season, Taran, where Jeff asked Judd about lying, and he's like, "Yeah, man, I haven't lied in this game. Yeah, I haven't told a damn lie in this game, but I think I'm about to start because I think there's a lot of liars out here."
Yeah, it's I'm not a liar, man. I don't do that, man. I don't do those lies, man. That's not what I do.
Oh, it's so good. And I will say also, I can't remember if this is a testament to the old seasons or just this particular season. I feel like very short tribal councils, right? Where
Yeah.
tribal councils are usually like 10 minutes in modern seasons. These are like 5 max.
Yeah, well, I do think that that is one of the reasons where we feel like that these characters are more fleshed out, where I think a lot of the time goes into tribal council in the modern seasons. And I do think that that is something that I think we can cut it down.
Yeah, I think so. I know they try to really build up that like anything can happen at tribal council, but even this shows that like there can be a live tribal council where someone plays an idol and then they have to vote for Bobby John. That doesn't need to be extended into, maybe in the case of Edge of Extinction, like an entire episode where you can just sort of condense it up. All right, we get the whispering that happens. We're not going to know what's going to happen until the pen hits the parchment. That's totally fine. Let's sort of, maybe build out some other stuff before tribal council, before we get to the vote here. But Bobby John, I guess, is the first person to, like, I wouldn't say get idled out of the game, but he is certainly the first person to maybe have his position due to the play of a hidden immunity idol.
And really, they made a big deal of this as well, that the only reason they kept Bobby John this long was because he sort of pleaded to Stephanie, like, don't let me go out pre-jury again. Just let me make the jury. And that's why they take out Brandon over Bobby John. And what's really funny is that he doesn't end up voting for Stephanie.
Well, because then she goes on to say, who would you remove from the game? Oh, I guess Bobby John, the person who thanked me for letting me be on the jury.
Well, it was only because he was the first person on the jury. Then he could be,
man,
first one in,
last
one
tanking
out.
those questions.
Oh boy, yeah, crocodile tank.
Yeah. After Bobby John goes out, we're gonna then have the vote where we swing back and have Jamie blindsided. And Taran, we really did painted a picture of Jamie losing it out there.
Yes, he just got very paranoid. He talked to Rafe about Final 3. He's like, "Well, we're going to Final 3, right?" And Rafe is like, "I just don't feel comfortable giving my word as a man to you right now." And he thinks that he's like, his paranoia is getting to him. And Jamie's, I just don't want to be suckered. We at least got our 6, right? We got the 6. We're sticking to the 6. And they're just like, we got to get rid of this guy. Like, he's gonna do something in our sleep, right?
Rafe flat out says, I've almost given up trying to understand Jamie's strategy in the game. And it's an interesting point because we talk all the time about some of these wild cards, right? When you have these sort of like agents of chaos in the game, how sometimes you're able to use them to your side, but sometimes just for risk management, you want to get rid of them. That they might be X factors in the game. And so I could imagine someone like Rafe, if he's feeling like Jamie has transitioned from a constant to a variable over the course of their time together, that maybe it's time to sort of write him out of the equation, especially if Jamie's attitude is going to get more and more flippant over these days.
Yeah. And I think what's happening is that simultaneously, as Jamie continues to move in this paranoid direction, we get this reward section where Steph is there with Judd and Gary and Danny. And this is like kind of the first time we're hearing that, like, oh, Steph gets along really well with Danny. They're really clicking really well. Judd's getting naked. It's a great time.
Yeah, it's one of those, again, we see so few things from Danny that, like, this is a really key thing, that Danny is essentially going to win the game by getting in good with the power couple of Stephanie and Rafe. And you even see it here with them just like really vibing personally. And again, in a game of a season of relationships instead of a season of strategy, that's really going to take them far, especially like Rafe and Steph are getting ticked off at Jamie and are getting more and more happy with Danny. she's gonna work his way into that alliance.
Yeah. Am I crazy that I really enjoyed this whole sequence at the reward? Like, I thought it was basically you have like most of like the important characters are there, minus Rafe, and they're spending time together. And then they get their videos from home.
Yeah, and
it was good. I most of these rewards, I was just like, then they went on the reward thing. But I have like extensive notes on this one because there was a lot to it strategically, character-wise. Gary's gonna make this pitch of to be the best, you got to beat the best, which becomes a recurring theme in the season. And Judd is like, nah, the threat's gotta go. It's gonna hurt me, but the threat's gotta go. And then we get the videos from home, and Danny was just, I just wanted to see my dog.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Stuff. You'd be afraid that Gary's family would pull a CC Heidick, right, and be like, "Hello, Gary Hogaboom. How's my favorite ex-NFL quarterback doing?"
Wearing his jersey.
They do have like a really nice house in the background, and I was like, "Man, landscapers make a lot, huh?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they get to drink some coffee, get to bring back a lot of coffee.
Yes.
Exactly.
Big Folgers money.
But to your point, Taran, while Judd doesn't want to go along, and that's going to show when Judd gets left out of the Jamie vote, Steph seems to be a little more keen to play, which makes sense given also, I think Stephanie, the player in this season, is so interesting because I know there has been some arguments of like, okay, did Steph let the fame go to her head? But I think there's also a meta narrative of what does Steph play thinking about the people at home, right? And we know that's the way that Steph comes across is this like stick-to-itiveness, never give up, never surrender. I would certainly think if you're trying to pick the people to give the argument to be the best, you've got to beat the best to, Stephanie has to be one of them, right? Yeah. If she is someone who built her reputation on like being one of the most badass women the game has ever seen, I think that strategy would vibe with her a lot, and it seems like it does. And so I also do wonder, looking even back from Stephanie's perspective, how many of her decisions were informed of like, okay, I need to think about, hell, so many people have been inspired to apply for the game because of me. I want to make sure I play in a way that continues the brand of Stephanie LaGrossa, and how much that does come back to bite her.
Absolutely. And she even says, I appreciate that logic. I've got a good thing going, but I appreciate that logic. And she's gonna go along that logic, and it's gonna be part of her final questioning. So
yeah. Well, what move do you feel like that she makes that she is trying to think about the brand?
I mean, I think this Jamie vote, even though it's sort of a Rafe thing, is certainly part of that, right? Mm-hmm. Of this idea of like, okay, I want to bring Gary and Danny along because Jamie has shown that like he is not necessarily part of that, the people that are truly the best of the best, the elite of the elite, to go to the end with the Titans. I don't think it necessarily meant the coach perspective, right? Of like, we have to do this. But I can't not imagine that when Stephanie was making decisions out there in Guatemala, she was certainly thinking of like, okay, how is this going to be perceived in comparison to the immense amount of popularity I gained for myself in Survivor Palau?
Yeah, I think that I'd probably interpret it more in line with like kind of how she says it at the end, which is like I'm an athlete. I want to beat I think that she kind of felt like she could beat them. That if there is a little bit of arrogance to her in this season, that's where it kind of came from. Whereas another big character that talks about beating the best is going to be Wu later on in Survivor. And I think that with Wu, it really was like a respect thing. With Stephanie, it felt more like I can, come on, guys, I can beat people. I'm Stephanie LaGrossa.
Yeah, so this is the Jamie boot here, where I do think this, again, feels more like a Rafe decision to me than a Stephanie decision in particular, because I feel like we get a lot of the Jamie paranoia perspective from Rafe, a lot of the POV of like, he keeps asking me to play Guatemala for like the umpteenth time. He keeps saying we're in a final three. I get it. I'm done with him. But a key cog in this, surprisingly, is Lydia. Where, they basically say, all right, we think we have the numbers, right? I'm assuming Rafe thinks it's him, Steph, Danny, and Gary are on board. But they need Lydia, once again, as we'll see with the Judd vote, to prevent a tie. And so even though I think she's, for lack of a better term, strategically irrelevant to a lot of this post-merge, especially. There are a couple moments where I think Lydia finds herself in an interesting position here.
Yeah, Lydia kind of disappears throughout most of the post-merge. Like she has sort of like a pre-merge bump. They make it seem like that her like enthusiasm is almost like single-handedly like the reason why we see Nakum
she can
win.
do the pancake.
Yeah, win one of the challenges. Yeah, Elvis is the king of rock and roll, but I'm the queen. She's like, yes, she gets everybody like pumped up.
What was in her? What were in those termites? That
I don't know.
right? Like something really got in there.
I don't know. Or in the fish. I don't know. Maybe she's just channeling the Maya. The Maya were known to just be very ecstasy fueled people, and so here's Lydia just stomping all over jungle. Here we come to save the day.
They're gonna leave Judd out of this vote, Taran. And that's going to be sort of like a harbinger of like what's to come. And then for Cindy too, if it's like first you get left out of the vote, everything's cool though. Don't worry, you are definitely not going to be the next person from the alliance that we take out. Oh wait, actually you are.
Yeah, it's I just wanted somebody to tell me, man, what's going on. Judd doesn't even feel bad whatsoever, man. It's just that Judd wishes that he would have told Judd, and it's like, why are you talking in third person all of a sudden, Judd?
Because Judd, I don't know, Judd might as well talk in the fifth person. Like he is just so beyond words at a certain point. But I mean, they essentially didn't tell Judd because they didn't want this reaction, right? They didn't want Judd standing up being like, why you gotta get rid of Jamie, man? Jamie's a damn good guy, man. You wanna know who's a freaking damn liar? Gary Hawkins is a freaking damn liar, man. He just told me he wants to go to the end with the best man. Now it's freaking arguing with Cindy over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Judd, he's upset about it, but he's trying to be a good soldier. And so they ultimately end up getting him back on board for this episode to vote out Gary. Gary is gone, far enough, but it seems like that Gary and Danny, they might be able to get Lydia, but they still seem a vote short.
Yeah. But Gary's last stand is so fun. The tribal council, his final tribal council, produces for me two pretty iconic quotes. As Taran mentioned before, Gary saying, I like Steph. There are people here that are starstruck by her. That's not her fault, but they can all probably get her autograph after the show. And then, of course, the infamous Judd going on once again saying, like, I haven't lied at all, man. I never lied at all. And then Gary says, okay, this is a lie. Hey, guys, the idol is on the ground. That's a lie. And Judd just gets completely caught flat-footed. Is like, yeah, I told you I was a bad liar, man. Like, yeah, that's a lie.
All right, okay, I lied about the damn idol.
Yeah.
What do you want?
And another great thing about the autograph line is, so Bobby, John, and Jamie, again, the fierce rivals have now been voted off, and they have like legitimately fallen in love with each other. Like Jamie is nuzzling Bobby John whenever they get a dig in at Stephanie. They're coming up with secret handshakes. It's an incredible end to their arc.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hate isn't the opposite of love. Apathy is the opposite of love.
Yeah.
They're like the bromance has even in the reunion, it has continued on. Jamie and Bobby John.
Judd also has a great quote about Judd the philosopher. He says, Gary likes to think he's not a part of this lying game, but the person you least think is likely to lie is basically the biggest liar.
I also love Judd's miming with being like, I guess I better start lying because I'm coming back to the camp, but there's lies over here, over there, over there, over here, over here, over there. Like, I think Judd he was told to misdirect the tribal council, but he's literally misdirecting by pulling the Jada Essence Hall of like, look over there, and trying to get people to look in other directions so they don't think about him.
All right. The final 6 is when Danny really kicks things into high gear. And this is really like, Danny has been rather invisible then here through this first half of the merge, and then she's going to kick it into high gear starting at the auction. Also, before we get to the auction in that episode, Mike, there is like an extensive scene talking about Stephanie's flatulence.
Yeah, this is a weird beginning of camp life. Maybe I go back on my statement that we need more camp life, considering we get Judd talking about Steph smelling like eggs, and then all of them doing cartwheels for an extended sequence as we get Danny's sort of confessional as she pulls off, of course, the perfect dismount, Simone Biles style, being like, I'm going to work my way here. I'm going to pull a Rory. I'm going to find my little crack. And she does, but like this is really the emergence of Danny. I would just say like the Survivor player. She gets a brief glimpse of that back during the Blake vote, but like you said, it's been a while since we've seen Danny talk about the game specifically.
Yeah, that perfect little alliance can't go down to the final 5. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going down without a fight, and I've got Lydia.
Okay, so we get in the auction. Is this the first time that we have an advantage to the challenge in the auction?
Yes, and that's another really interesting hallmark of a lot of the rest of Survivor that shows up here, to the point where the auction pretty much is over in season 30 because people are putting in too much 4 advantages and ignoring the rest of the stuff. Here in its introduction, everyone except Danny ignores the advantage and allows the only player out to bid in on an advantage that essentially pretty much guarantees her immunity at the final 6.
Because Danny cleans up at the auction, right? She gets the beef jerky uncontested for $20. Then she pools her money with Rafe, and they get like a sandwich. And then she still has money left for the advantage.
Yeah. I mean, again, like the idol, this was the first challenge advantage introduced, right? Like, I don't think anyone realized how OP it was going to be, and especially how OP we're going to see it in future seasons, to the point where, like, if you pretty much win the challenge advantage, unless your name is Malcolm Freeberg or Wendell Holland, you're going to win the challenge.
Yeah,
so
this was a massive advantage.
Yeah, so they probably thought, like, it's probably nothing. Danny's frail enough as it is. She's not going to win the challenge. Let her have it. But I think any sort of bad will was probably written over by the fact that loved ones come around the corner and people just forget about that advantage.
Yeah. And then you're allowed to pool money here, Taran. Do you feel like, does that take away from the drama or add to the drama, allowing the survivors to pool their money together?
You know, I remember liking that at the time, because it was like, like you need people to help you. But I feel like they've taken that out in modern seasons when they've had this in modern seasons. And I think that's the right call, because it just gives the majority the ability to just steamroll the Survivor auction.
Yes. So you basically, the person who needs the advantage then can't just go all in and not eat. Because what I did like about it is that it sort of like exposes where some of the lines are in terms of the relationships and the people helping each other. But yeah, if it comes down to who's going to bid $500 for the advantage, as it will be later on, you don't want to have like basically, okay, give me $1 so I can outbid this person who's on the bottom.
Yeah, I'd rather have like if the intent is to expose the lines, I'd rather have like a coconut chop challenge or a touchy subjects than pooling money at the auction to showcase that.
Yeah. Okay. Ultimately, we're gonna see that Judd is going to win. He's gonna pick Cindy and Mindy, and then Stephanie and her then boyfriend.
Yeah. Future VH1 star Mindy Hall is making an appearance here. Cindy's twin, one of 3 pairs of twins in this season, which is absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, it's very fun. Also, I guess in like a very Candace Woodcock Cody way, right? To see Steph's boyfriend Michael, when she's obviously going to marry a much more famous person down the line than the one she leaves in the jungles of Guatemala.
Yeah,
I mean, this was actually a terrible thing for Stephanie's game that she gets chosen on this to hang out with Judd's wife here.
That's true, because this
promise.
Yeah, but she doesn't lie then. Let's be clear. She doesn't lie then.
No lies. But
no lies at that moment.
Probably a line that's crossed.
Yeah. So it's also kind of a big moment for someone like Rafe as well, right? And we're going to see this as a through line this episode and next episode. Rafe gets a little angry when he gets neglected for these very personal rewards. And he seems, I think, the most broken up that he can't see his mom and that Judd deprived him of a loved one's visit.
Yeah. They're going to send Rafe and Danny and Lydia to go back and live at the old Yasha tribe because they're going to not get to partake in the loved one's visit at the Mayan ruins, which are the merged tribe camp. And so this is a time when Danny and Rafe are going to bond over being over there. Again, I guess nobody talks to Lydia.
I guess not.
Yeah, he's there.
But it's, I mean, I hope they even comforted Lydia, because remember, like, the person that Lydia saw for her loved one was her brother, who she hasn't talked to in 2 years, and she gets denied a loved one's visit.
Yeah. Okay, she saw it today. That should like cover her for another
Broke the
year.
streak. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel for Lydia in so much, like, she has a 17-year-old son and she needs a car. She hadn't seen her brother in 2 years. Everyone's like, no, Lydia, you don't, come on, Steph, you're coming with here. Lydia, screw off. Go do the pancake.
Yeah. So Taran, we're gonna see Stephanie. She's talking with Judd's wife, talking about like what a great relationship they have. Later on, when Judd gets voted out in this episode, he will come back in the final tribal council and say like, why'd you lie to my damn wife, man? Why did you have to break? It's one thing to lie to me, man, but why do you gotta lie to my wife? And Stephanie says this is not a lie. As someone who studies human behavior on the regular, is this a lie?
I mean, there is a technical, there is a difference, right? There's a difference between Stephanie saying to Judd's wife, I'm taking Judd to the end, when she has no intention of ever doing that, and telling Judd's wife, I'm taking Judd to the end, and then things change and she changes her mind and she doesn't end up doing it. Those are different things. The end result is the same, though, and that's what you have to consider when you're talking to somebody who has been burned by it, is that they don't care necessarily whether you were lying in the moment or made it a lie by your actions later. The end result is still that you betrayed what you had said. And so her explanation here is awful. I mean, this whole exchange is wonderful. It says, hey, Steph, you still starving? You haven't eaten anything. You've eaten more than I've eaten at home.
Wow.
Like, I love to eat. You know that about me, Judd. You know I love to eat. So the only thing you should be starving for is my damn vote, man.
Good call.
Your strategy was to just backstab, man. Everyone that walked by you, man, you just backstab this one, that one, that one. But you crossed the line, man, when you lied to my damn wife, man. You should have kept your mouth shut, man. When my wife got there, man, I'm gonna keep a promise to you tonight. And that's, I did not lie to your wife because I wasn't lying at that point. I had no idea that what we were going to do at the time. It was all Danny's fault. Danny's the one that said we needed to do it. It's Survivor. These things happen.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, she's not false here, but I think the way she goes about expressing it is bad. Because at the end of the day, it's not going to matter to Judd whether or not she was lying in the moment or not. For him, what matters is that he's voted out. He's just trying to bring this up as like a trap for her. Oh, well, you never intended to take me. Like you said, Steph was totally fine with Judd. It is Rafe that is growing more and more disgruntled with this guy as the days pass. But in her going back on this, she has promptly now planted this idea in his head of, oh, I never was with you the entire time. And intentionality beats out actuality all the time in Survivor. They say perception is reality. And so if the perception is you're a damn liar, man, if you contend with, well, technically I didn't lie then, that's not a strong enough argument.
Yeah. And look, you don't cross the line with Judd's wife. Judd's wife, man, it makes me feel like I ate 25 White Castle cheeseburgers, man.
Yeah, exactly. A whole crave taste. Full. I mean, I will say I had the pleasure of talking with both Judd and his wife Kristen, and she has the, I could understand though that 25 White Castle cheeseburgers worth of love that they have. Yeah. She's a very sweet woman.
We did a great talking with T-Bird with Judd, and he was like referring to Kristen, who was nearby during that. I want to make sure we get the links to that up on the post when this podcast ends up going up, if anyone wants to go back and listen to that. And he was really great on that talking with T-Bird interview. But the Judd vote out here then in this episode, to me, this one is such a head scratcher. I really don't understand why Stephanie goes along with this. Mike, do you have any insight?
Well, so it really is, I think, for me, Stephanie going along with Rafe. This one in particular, because Rafe's entire thing was that he felt, and this is why individual rewards are so fun but so nasty in the game of Survivor, is that when people pick other people to go on the rewards and neglect others, it really gets your motor spinning. where Rafe is thinking, wait a minute, does Judd not like me enough? Am I getting pushed out of the alliance right now in Judd's favor? I need to strike now before he gets me. And so he's going to get Danny on board. He's going to get Lydia on board. And so I think Steph kind of has to go by proxy. She sort of talked about this even with the Lydia vote, right? Where she's like, what am I supposed to do? Tie the vote up? I don't think she wants to do that at this moment. She doesn't want to break from Rafe in this moment. And so I really do think this is her just sort of like gritting her teeth and saying, okay, Rafe, if you feel like this is best for us, I will vote out Judd. Even though, as they're both bringing up, and they'll bring up next episode, like, we keep making promises to people and then immediately cutting them the very next day. This is not good.
Well, I think this is easily Danny's best episode in terms of the edit that she received. Starting the episode with, I'm not going to go out without a fight. I'm going to find the cracks. She's then, Rafe says the only thing he can trust about Judd is that he can't trust him. And so Danny talks to us. She said that Rafe doesn't trust Judd, and she can use that as a crack. We're going to see Danny talking to Steph and saying, hey, Judd is still mad about that whole Jamie thing. And she quotes things that Judd has said and attributes those quotes to a conversation he was having just with Lydia, which makes it seem like Judd is conspiring with Lydia.
Because there's a conversation where Lydia's basically just like, where they're like, oh, you know who's running the game, right? And just like, of course I damn know who's running the damn game, man. Like, of course you have to be a blind squirrel in a nut factory not to see it, And so they take that as a sign of, well, Judd said that he's coming after you guys because he said you were the ones running things.
Exactly. And so Steph tells us that she's starting to doubt Judd. She'd like to believe him, but he's been caught in lies, and Danny hasn't lied at all. So she believes Danny. I am inclined to believe that obviously they're going to be reaching to give Danny as much credit as possible as the winner. But I am inclined to believe that this is Danny's finest moment in the game.
So just thinking about this yesterday, sure, all that is true. Judd has, some marks against his character in terms of he has told lies. Danny maybe has not told any. But where is Judd going? What is he doing? What is the play that he is making? Like, is he actually a threat to Stephanie in any way?
Well, she at this point, she has to choose between Judd and Lydia, right? And so technically it's also a betrayal of Lydia. For as much as they've talked about, like, Lydia went off with Gary, she went off with Danny, she's always voted with them. So she has to betray one of them, and if she feels like Judd is the one that is turning and is probably more capable of winning something, it does kind of make sense to just go ahead and take him out before Lydia here. Right? So it's you can kind of see it, I think.
Yeah, I think they're it's not exactly the strongest case, but there definitely is evidence. I mean, Taran, you bring up a great point in the tail end there. That let's also remember that Judd just, I think Judd was in it for a couple of these challenges. Now that all of the young, athletic guys are gone, despite the fact that Rafe has more necklaces, I think Judd might be one of the threats left to win challenges, certainly more than Lydia. But it's definitely one of the worst moves that Stephanie in particular ends up making, because it seems like she particularly had an extremely close relationship with Judd, who, to your point, Rob, Judd wasn't going anywhere, but
might have lost Mike
Mike's
for a second.
Going somewhere.
But to pick up what Mike is saying, that isn't the dream for Stephanie to sit in the final two with Judd? Could you imagine Judd in the final two where somebody's asking him a question and it's like, okay, Judd, why did you vote me out? Like, all right, man, listen, man,
you're a damn scumbag. That's why.
Yeah. It wasn't my damn idea, okay? All right, I did what I had to do, okay? You were a damn liar, and I had to vote you out. You just see him exploding at a tribal council. I think that would be like maybe the scenario where Stephanie could win in a final two.
I mean, I do not disagree, but I think that, like, worm tongue Rafe was just in her ear about, like, hey, I am your final two. And I feel like that's, and she's going to say later that the Cindy moment is the first time she's ever disagreed with Rafe in the game. And I think that partnership was true. And she was always planning to go to the end with Rafe. She was always loyal to Rafe. And so because of that, everybody else didn't matter.
We love the Lord of the Rings reference, Taryn, by the way. I love the Theoden king that is Stephanie right now. Just the gray wizened person by the end of this.
Yes. So I think that she really her mind was sort of warped in the direction of like, this is what's best to get Rafe and I to the final. It's funny because I'm reminded a lot of Big Brother 3 with Danielle and Jason, which is obviously a reference that maybe Survivor viewers might not recognize, but I see it in a somewhat similar way where she was dead set on me and Rafe in the finals, and ultimately they make a wrong call in terms of who they should bring, and then that person ends up beating them. But it's that sort of mentality of I need to get there with Rafe, I think, that really ruins her with the rest of the alliance and causes her to make this decision, which I'm sure Rafe is supporting, and she's hearing from Danny. And they've made this sort of separate thing with Danny now that feels like, okay, you know, when we maybe like Danny, maybe we can trust Danny a little bit more. And so ultimately the mistake is made.
Okay. The final 6 is definitely a point that you look back at as in terms of like where Stephanie is fumbling, where Danny is making her gains. We have that epic final 5 challenge where or final 5 episode where Cindy ends up,
hold on.
Yes?
Hold on. We cannot get past Judd's boot without talking about his exit lines here, because Survivor Guatemala is full of iconic exit lines. We actually skip past Jamie's, right? The blindsided, nice. Now that's how you do it. We're gonna get Cindy's. I'll be looking at you through the roof of my brand new car. But how can you beat? I hope you all get bit by freaking crocodiles, scumbags.
Thanks, guys. Hope you all get bit by a freaking crocodile, scumbags, scumbags. And then in his eggs like final words, like I was pissed off, lied to by everybody, man.
And I'm pretty sure he curses.
Wait.
Well.
That was Bobby John. You got that mixed up, Judd.
Yeah, it's a great moment. Hope you'll get bit by a bunch of crocodiles, scumbags. That one of the most iconic. Mike, I'm sure that's come up in a list or two we've done over the years.
Well, I don't think we've done exit lines so far. We have done final words, but I don't think we've done things you say before Jeff snuffs your torch. Maybe that's one for the future, right? Because again, we have 3 here from Guatemala. There's like a Colleen, like a be fair, play nice type of thing, not to be confused with Johnny Fairplay. I'm sure we could come up with a list if there's demand for it.
Okay. All right. At the final 5, ultimately, things are going to go sideways for Cindy after the car challenge. We talked about that earlier in the show, but was there a different way to go here for this Cindy vote? It seems like that Rafe and Danny want to get rid of Cindy. And again, here's Stephanie, who is caught in the middle about what to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing is, it's not that bad of a call, especially because Danny at this point is looking like she's not going to be able to win anything. And Cindy has been performing very well in challenges. Judd had been performing well in challenges prior. So there is, I think, a logic to, okay, there's only one person not in the alliance at this point. Let's just start taking out some of these challenge threats to make sure that we win in the end. It does make sense. I think Cindy is probably the right call here. She probably has a decent chance to win if she makes it past this vote. And I can't really fault their decision ultimately. But at the end of the day, they do let Danny get too far. They just were too comfortable with the fact that they didn't think she'd win.
Yep. She is more of a challenge threat than Danny is, especially with the knowledge that Danny is not doing so good physically as we get towards the end of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing as well is that you may think like, okay, this is a no-brainer decision. Of course, you give the car to other people, but it really does seem like it was open and shut that like Cindy was getting stuck out of the alliance. Yeah, like she was left out of the Judd vote. Like the writing was on the wall that that Cindy was not going to be included here. So, I mean, there was a very, 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 very good chance that even if she gives the cars away, she gets voted out. might as well leave with a car while you're at it, right? Especially from someone like Cindy, who apparently comes from a background where like she doesn't necessarily have the means to have her own car. I know that on paper, it looks like a ridiculous decision. Why give up the opportunity to give 4 cars to other people instead of keeping one for yourself? And Jeff obviously makes the big deal out of it. But at the same time, it's all situational. And I heavily doubt that if she gives up the cars to everyone else, that she ends up staying here.
Probably not. She had a great talking with T-Bird. Also, it was a 2-part talking with T-Bird that we heard all about, not just her decision to keep the car, but what happened to the car and Cindy after Survivor, when she drove the car cross country and went on a harrowing adventure. Definitely, if you want to hear more from Cindy Hall, who really had 2 great talking with T-Bird episodes that we did at the end of last year. So, Taran, if we're really going with like the magnifying glass, can we find anything that Danny did to influence this vote?
I mean, we see here that that this is when the final 3 between Rafe, Danny, and Steph really solidifies, and that's obviously going to be very important. This is, I imagine, like after the Judd vote, they're like, you know what? Maybe this is the way to go. Maybe we solidify this final 3 with Danny, who we think we can beat, and then that's it. We've made final 2. We've made it happen. Rafe has also been promised final 2 by Danny. He says that's a crazy amount of security. And so I think in Rafe's mind, it's kind of like, look, I've kind of got all my bases covered at this point. Like, this is not too shabby. And we never really get a lot of insight into the dynamics of the structure of that majority alliance from the merge. Like, what would have happened if Rafe and Steph had not made these moves? Were they really at the core? Would they really have been able to run down with it like they did if they hadn't made the moves early? Or like, what kind of setup did Cindy have? Where did she think her end game was? Where did Judd think his end game was? I imagine Judd was a number for Steph and them, but I don't know. We never really got that structure set up for us, so it might make sense that that Rafe is now feeling like, okay, with Danny as my secret weapon, I've got this game on lock.
It's a weird dynamic where this is one of the only Survivor seasons I can think of where the GOATs were making the decisions. Because I think, to your point, Taran, if you ask Cindy, who's your endgame plan, she's going to say Stephanie. If you ask Lydia, who's your endgame plan, she's going to say Stephanie. Everybody wanted to take Stephanie to the end because they knew it would be a slam dunk, court ball style, that they would beat her. And so I think
Stephanie's head is the ball.
Exactly. And they're setting up the pick for her to lose 7-0. And I think it's really interesting that, again, she is a power player this season, despite the fact that when it comes to the end game, she has no power. She is bound to lose really no matter what. Her best chance is against Rafe, but I think he beats her 7-0 personally. And so I think that it's really intriguing to have her be the one to make the decisions, despite the fact that once day 38 turns to day 39, she has lost all the power. But she's determining essentially who's going to win sitting next to her.
And basically, Rafe is able to use Danny as the paring knife to shave off all of Steph's other options so that he is the only one left, right? And it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense from Rafe's point of view.
It's an interesting tribal council as well, because I feel this is the first time that Rafe is in the spotlight. Like, again, Steph hasn't really been brought up because she's this GOAT. But when Cindy finds out that Rafe wants to target her, she starts to turn things back onto Rafe. And it speaks a lot towards Rafe's game that this is the first time in the entire season that Rafe finds himself in the crosshairs. Everyone else has in this game except for Rafe. And now Rafe finally gets it at the final 5. And to watch him react to that, again, it doesn't mean anything because Cindy ends up going unanimously here. But I do think it's a very interesting moment that I think Rafe is now starting to get called out a bit for the stuff he's attempting to do.
Yeah, Cindy says that he's the person to worry about before she gets voted out. I'll think of you guys every time I look through the sunroof of my new car.
Yeah. And like Rafe pitches to Steph, like, we got to take Cindy out. She's the biggest threat to win this game. And Steph is like, am I going to burn another jury vote though? And Rafe's just like, shh,
just do it. Just do it.
Okay. You don't need to worry about that.
It's all right. I mean, you brought this up last week, and you brought this up at the beginning of this podcast, Rob. I do think that the tandem efforts of Guatemala and Fiji killed the car reward on Survivor. I just think that there were these opportunities, right? Like, imagine when Pontiac found out, okay, there's going to be this reward where someone can give away a bunch of cars to a bunch of people, Oprah style, as Cindy will invoke her name. Like, it's going to be such a great TV moment. And then she doesn't. She spits in the face of that opportunity. Like, I'm sure the car company thinks, I don't know if I want to be affiliated with the show anymore.
Is it a negative association? I mean, in this case, and even in Fiji, you could argue, like, no, people want these cars real bad. These people will do anything to get these cars.
Yeah. So I think, to your point, I think unfortunately it's the more myopic perspective of like, oh, these are affiliated with like negative wheeling and dealing. We don't want our brand affiliated with that. Therefore, we're gonna back the car away here. Even though, like you said, it's more so saying this is what people will do for a car. It's so good, you can't give it away to other people. You got to keep your hands on it.
Can I just say that there's something that I noticed in this rewatch of Guatemala that really would have informed a lot of my preseason, picks for season 40, which is that I never realized this, but Danny, along with the $1 million, also won a car as part of her prize.
Right.
So she won and then got the car. So she got the car curse applied after she had already won. So when she goes back to Winners at War, she was never gonna win.
That's a good point. Just like Amber gets given a car in Survivor All-Stars, and she didn't win Winners at War. So really, we had to trace it back, much like tire marks, back to where those cars came from in the original seasons. No wonder none of the old school players won, because they were winning cars.
It's really would have helped me narrow down my preseason picks.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, let's talk about the finale, because the finale is pretty wild. We have a big ceremony to kick off the finale. A ceremony by a bunch of people who are, would you say, are they Mayan elders, Mike?
Yeah, so this is, again, the weird appropriation, right? This is like the, all right, let's invite a bunch of old natives into Survivor to do some mumbo jumbo stuff. I do believe they have Mayan ancestors. I believe the story of the Mayan people is that their civilization was destroyed, but like the people assimilated themselves into Mesoamerican societies. Okay. So they are certainly part of that culture, but they're going to sort of, they're going to perform like a ceremony, as it were. I do love Lydia's tree mail, right? Where she's like, we're going to celebrate, we're going to party. But she's like reading between the lines of the tree mail, like, we're going to have a big feast. And then Rafe says, wait, where does the word celebrate come into this? Just to be clear, are we actually getting a feast, or are people just going to come visit our home for a second?
So they perform the ceremony, which involves sacrificing a chicken, and Stephanie has her eyes on that chicken the whole way through, Taran, to the point where she asks Lydia to ask the people performing the ceremony, hey, can we eat the chicken? No. This is a ceremony for the chicken. This is not an eating chicken. The ceremony,
which only makes this whole thing worse, which is that like the entire sort of punchline of this entire segment is that they go ahead and eat the chicken. And I will say I really respect Rafe for being like, no, after 38 days or whatever it was, he was like, I'm not gonna disrespect their culture and eat this chicken.
Story would have worked better if Danny didn't eat the chicken.
Oh yeah, it's the cursed chicken. The curse of the car, then the curse of the chicken.
Yeah. My favorite part of this, though, comes when then they have the chicken and then they break the chicken's neck and they pull the head off the chicken. And Rafe tells us how Stephanie turned to him and said, is it dead? And he's like, yes. No, I mean, that they took the head off. Yeah, it's dead. That's a dead chicken now, Stephanie.
Maybe Steph took the phrase chicken with its head cut off quite literally. That maybe the chicken goes on to lead a nice, full life without a head, that the head was merely cosmetic and chickens can actually live without it. That's what Stephanie
grows a new one, like a starfish. Yeah,
exactly. Like, she's not from Kansas, she's not from any of these farm states, she's a Jersey girl, she's never met a chicken in her damn life.
Damn.
Exactly. Yeah. But I would tell you, if there's someone who is more ticked off than Rafe at them eating the chicken, it's Jeff Probst. Jeff
Mhm.
is besides himself at tribal council when he finds out. And it seemed like he legitimately wasn't tipped off beforehand that these people ate the chicken and caused the terrible storm that rocked them that afternoon.
Yeah. I don't know. I think he might have been playing it up.
You think so? Alongside Danny's birthday party, that there's just this one producer that's
I think he's incredulous. Like, I think that he goes into like that fun. There's nothing going on the lead up to a Lydia vote. He's like, all right, Jeff, get this. Okay, we did a ceremony. Like, I wonder if they did it. If they did a ceremony with a chicken with the intention of let's leave the chicken there for them.
Is the chicken a plant? Is it like a social experiment? Or what would you do type of thing?
This was the bait Blake of producing. I think
I'm with Rob on this one. I think Jeff always knows. Jeff knows what's going on prior to tribal because they want to make sure that he knows what to get at, right? So
I don't know. I really like this idea now, because what do we keep saying, us international Survivor lovers? Like, we want more moral dilemmas in U.S. Survivor. This was one. Hey, someone sacrificed a decorative chicken. Are you going to eat it? And what does that say about you? I want more of these scenarios.
Yeah.
You know, I want more like, hey, here's a piece of steak, but it fell accidentally on one of Bobby John's open sores. Are you going to eat it? Like, what is that?
Is that a moral decision? Is that a moral dilemma there? Or is that just, he also just went to the bathroom and handled this decision?
Yeah. We have our final three challenge, incredible final three challenge. I mean, I think that Palau is probably tops. Borneo is up there, but is this a top 5 final challenge for Survivor? No.
What the hell are you talking about? Absolutely
I don't know.
Not.
I think that when they're holding on to the rope, go back and forth. This was exciting. No,
you can't put a challenge in the top 5 that doesn't work the way it's intended. Like, the way they intended it was that they were always going to be holding on to ropes, and when they let go of the rope, they're supposed to balance on it. When the fact is, the challenge just devolves into, oh, I just need to lean up against the post for 2.5 hours and I'll be fine. It leads to an interesting outcome, and it's the reason why Danny wins the challenge and ergo wins the game. But I would not necessarily call this a great final
did Jeff make a
it.
bad call on the field? Should you have not been allowed to touch the post?
I mean, I don't think they realized you could do that. I don't think they thought anyone was tall enough to do so. It's sort of like, I mean, I think next season's challenge is more so egregious, right? With like we're going to end with a balanced portion. And unfortunately, like, poor Terry Dietz is not nearly as balanced as Danielle DiLorenzo, but like, this definitely has more holes in it, right? Where it's like, oh, there's these specific apparatuses on the side that could get manipulated. It's always tough to follow up Bob Booey, specifically the challenges that last like 12 or so hours. But I do not think they anticipated things going the way that they did in more ways than one.
I don't know. I check out a lot of these challenges. Maybe because the fact that this is an endurance challenge and we don't have not had a lot of those so far on the countdown. I thought this was especially exciting.
That's the thing, Rob, is that it is a great challenge to watch. It's like, and I think that's probably why they made the call in the moment to be like, let them stay. Actually, this is good. But in some ways, they played themselves because they had no footage of Danny in the entire season, and a Wraith victory probably is a much better story for the overarching storyline for the season. And it wasn't particularly fair, I think, as Mike is pointing out. So like, it did lead to some great moments. I think, again, the challenge was great to watch. Watching Stephanie slowly fail was great to watch. Rafe coming in after the competition's over to release Danny from the promise is great. But it was kind of like a short-term greatness for a little bit of a long-term loss, as seeing Rafe win this season probably would have been a little more satisfying overall, and maybe the season isn't quite as forgotten if that's the outcome.
And then we spoke about the Stephanie villain edit. I will say she does have like one moment of heroics in the finale here, right? To Taran's point, I do think her last stand where she's basically at like a 90-degree angle crying out in pain. It's a reminder to people of like, oh yeah, that's the person I fell in love with in Survivor Palau. So it's a nice little sparkle from Stephanie when she has not necessarily been sparkling in that regard. Screw gold or platinum. She is like tinfoil in this season comparatively.
And another thing to add here, and like, I don't want to, really anger Rafe here, but I still just don't buy the idea that he immediately knew he was going home. And that's the thing. I think that part of this too is that he felt guilt over the fact that he is the reason they took Danny to the final three, because Stephanie had been talking about like wanting to take Lydia potentially. And it was Rafe's plan to take Danny to the final three, that they felt like they could beat Danny. And I feel like that's another part of like why I think he comes in after watching Steph fight so hard, and I'm sure he just watched the previous season where she did too, and just feels so much guilt over the fact that he is going to be the cause of her going out right before the end. And he feels like releasing himself from that, and then also getting to go, I think was that moment.
He didn't want to be complicit at all in either, Danny knocking out Stephanie or Stephanie blaming him for not taking him to the end, or not taking Stephanie to the end. Let's talk about the final tribal council as we'll work to get Mike back on with us. I know Mike's been having some intermittent power issues over at his house. So at the final tribal council, not a ton of fireworks. Judd comes in hot. We talked about that, but other than that, nobody is like super mad seemingly at the final tribal council, right?
I mean, we have some interesting moments. You like Bobby John is gonna ask Steph, "Are you proud of the way that you played this game?"
I mean that's a pretty loaded question, right?
But he asked both of them the same question.
That's true. But he doesn't end up voting in that direction.
Sure.
We get from Jamie that I just couldn't do what you did to get close to people and then just let them go. I just wouldn't be able to talk to them like that. You were people's best friends, and then you just voted them out.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think that Lydia has a more interesting jury question than you would think, where she basically gives arguments of like, hey, you betrayed me both. You both had told me at one point that you had my back. And so when we're talking about like the quote unquote bitter jurors of Survivor Guatemala, we oftentimes think Judd, Jamie, Cindy. We don't really think about Lydia.
Yeah.
But I think Lydia feels pretty burned as well.
And I think that Stephanie has a particularly bad answer to Lydia, which is sort of like the opposite. We always talk about like how Todd ends up diffusing Jean Robert or Cochran with Malcolm. It's like, I had to do it because you would have beat me. Stephanie does like the inverse of that to Lydia. She says, yeah, I had to take you out because I wanted to be at the end with the best players, the strongest players in the game. That would have been a referendum on what I want to do of being at the end with the best players, not you. The worst players.
I'm athletic and competitive. I'm not just gonna go for the easy win. I want to beat the best.
You.
If I take you, what does that say about me? Is a terrible question to ask to a juror.
You suck so bad. That would be like, what's the fun in even winning against somebody who stinks as much as you?
Yeah. And her answer to Jamie is also bad, where she's like, her explanation for why she blindsided people. She's like, well, I just have a hard time saying I'm going to vote someone out. As you said, blindsiding is the best way to go. Like trying to be like, I mean, you said this, so it's really, if you think about it, I was just doing what you said. It was best.
I love Rafe really signaling hard to Steph with his question, where after he's asked his question, he goes, hey, Steph, by the way, in your closing statement, you should say why you should win over the other person.
Yeah. So first Rafe says to Danny, you made the opposite decision than the one you said you were going to make. Why did you do that? Which again implies to me that he was still feeling a little certain way about the fact that it didn't happen and that he was not trying to save her own feelings or image at this point. But she says the competition changed her mind on who was the most deserving, which, was maybe not the best answer for Rafe, but that didn't matter. And you're right. He sets Steph up. He says, Steph, I know you've played an amazing game. We played a lot of it together. I would like for you to tell me about one of the moves that you've made that I don't even know about. Which
I didn't do anything.
Right.
I didn't.
This is a setup for her to give additional things that Rafe maybe hasn't been able to tell the jury. And she says, and Steph completely misreads this. She thinks that Rafe is going to be upset if she's made moves outside of what he knew. Like, right? She's like, I didn't do anything outside of what you were always with me, Rafe. And he's like, that's not why I'm asking this question, actually. Can you just please, I would like to just say again that you should say the moves that you have made in this game, because Danny has not made any and you have made a lot. So please just explain that you've played a very good game, please. That's what I would like.
If you could.
So, if you can. So, Taran, I mean, you invoked this comparison before, and I've certainly seen it in the feedback for this in anticipation for this podcast. How comparable is this to you to the Big Brother 3 Final 2? This idea of this person who was in charge of a lot of the moves, but, cut ties in the process, as opposed to someone who might not necessarily have been in power, but due to competition wins and relationships was able to work their way into the end.
I would say that, I'm sure we'll talk about this. And Danny talks about how she beat the radar, she hit her strategy, which I was a lot more into until I watched her on Winners at War. But I do think that Lisa is probably a little bit more strategically active in Big Brother 3. I think that Danielle is also a much more capable and strategically active player than Steph is. Where it would almost be like if Jason was the real brains behind the operation in Big Brother 3, but that's not really the case. And so I do think there are comparisons to make, but I don't think it's one for one at all. I do, however, love Judd's question to Danny as well.
You ever gone ice skating before, or roller skating? Because you're the best damn ice skater I've ever seen in my life. You skate right through to the end.
Skate right through the whole game. So you'd like to know when she's lied. And she just describes a couple. Sounds like you lied a lot. Maybe you should go to confessional.
And she's like, I ask forgiveness every day. And he just goes, good answer. Like he's like watching Family Feud instead of doing a Survivor jury question. I mean, Danny does sort of shut up him. I know that Judd was never going to vote for Stephanie, but I think Danny handles things okay, right? Which is like the only time I really lied was when I told Jamie and Brian I wasn't going to vote for them, and I did, as opposed to someone like Stephanie who did that to your face, should I remind you, to your wife, even though that was, and then I'll again launch Judd into that whole thing. But of course, in true pre-roundtable format, Judd's got to get the final jury question, right? Like he's the big character, he's the one that's going to be the last one to talk.
And the promise he's going to keep to Stephanie is that he promised he'd never write her name down.
Yeah, the only thing that Judd Sargent and Alicia Calloway have in common.
Yeah. I wonder, could Stephanie have played up when we talk about the final challenge where we see like that Stephanie is like Survivor's greatest loser. When she loses, she wins with us. Like, could she have maybe played this final tribal council like, I stink at this game. I'm so bad at it, but I'll never quit. I never give up, even though that I'm not good at this game.
I don't know.
This game is so hard for me.
Is that like a half Troyzan, right? Of like, I know I'm not gonna win, but I really will not quit at what I do. Where like, I admit you probably won't vote for me, but damn it, if I didn't try my hardest to lose here.
Isn't she Survivor's lovable loser who loses and then never gives up, and that's what we love about her?
It is, but I don't think that's the image that the voters would want in the person that backstabbed them.
Huh? Look, maybe she gets 2 votes. Think about it.
Wait, who's the other vote? Who's the other person that votes for her in that situation? Who gets swayed by the argument of, yeah, I betrayed you and I suck for it. Please vote for me.
Maybe Bobby John. Maybe Bobby John gets nostalgic about their losses. But
maybe. Okay.
I also liked Rafe's what he says as he votes. He says, the game is about who you are. Your character is your strategy, which is a great quote. But then it's followed by Steph is the ultimate survivor, which was not quite going to hold as true.
Not great. All right. We go to the live reunion, extended Jeff Probst's helicopter delivery of the votes. To me, Mike, this is like neither like fish nor fowl in that it's like, okay, it's Jeff like leaving with the votes and coming in, but it's not like funny or campy, just like a waste of time.
Well, I think Palau outdid both the final immunity challenge and the vote reveal, because I do believe last season is the infamous jet ski, or maybe All Stars was. I remember there was one where he like salutes the Statue of Liberty as well when coming into New York. So the Guatemala one is a little bit of a nothing burger, but we need to cherish these, you know, because even if it's like medium price steak, we're going to become vegetarians very soon when it comes to not seeing any of these Jeff Probst carrying the voting urn into the final tribal council setting. I will say overall, this is a fun reunion. I'm loving the denim look on Jeff Probst.
It has a wardrobe change.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like this was a good reunion in that, like, we heard from everybody. We even acknowledged sort of the nothing people in the back.
The nothing people?
I mean, listen, like, you're going to go to Morgan and Brianna for questions. I'm certainly happy they've had an impact on the season. But again, when we get to the survey, prove me wrong. And I like that, you know, Jeff does some check-ins with some of the bigger characters as well, you know, and it really shows, again, how strong this cast is, really, the vast majority of it, that it felt like we could go to so many people and not feel like it was a stretch, you know, like Brandon has moments, Blake has moments, Amy obviously has moments. It's not like we feel the need to check people off a list. Rather, oh, I'm interested in you talking about your time in the game. Please tell us about it.
Yeah.
Taran, what's the most memorable standout moment from this reunion?
Well, I like the overall tone. It's always hard for me to know what would have happened with the jury vote in other scenarios, and the fact that they all seem to sort of allude to, like, if Rafe had made it there, he would have won even against Danny. Is like good to know. Even
could we have gotten the show of hands? Jeff's like, well, there's no way of knowing. I'm like,
yeah.
Don't you do it in every other season?
There's no way of knowing which direction the votes are going.
Yeah.
But obviously, I think the biggest thing is Danny calling herself the stealth bomber. She didn't fly under the radar. She beat the radar. They didn't see her coming until she dropped the bombs on them. And Jeff says, well, Danny, that's interesting because we didn't see you playing the game until the end. And he goes to Gary. Gary, is Danny underrated? And Gary says, no. She was just a good person and a hard worker. Like the guy who was closest to her in that post merge was just like, nah. She just did what she could. But this is gonna be. I think if I'm going to give Danny credit for one thing, that's a great quote. And it's a quote that's going to stick with her and give her a great reputation overall for those that do remember her. Whether she played a fantastic game or not, she really knew how to market herself afterward.
Yeah, I think that Danny played perfectly for this particular season, right? Like some of these seasons are hyper strategic. I don't know if a Danny type of I'm just going to make some good relationships, be the girl from next door and win when I need to. I don't know if that works in like millennials versus Gen X, right? When things are hyper strategic and things are flipping on a dime. But here, where again, it's a very personality-based, relationship-driven season where if someone likes you, chances are they actually might put in the effort to keep you over some more unsavory individuals. It worked perfectly here. And that's why it's always tough to compare winners, because there really are different casts that are almost creating different themes, ethos, edicts for the season. For Danny's season in particular, it started over on Naku when she was hanging out with the good old boys, the killer bees. It really was like, all right, just, you know, smile, be nice, be honest with when you can, and make good with the people that are in power. And that ends up being the winning strategy. It's why Survivor is such a great game, is because there's so many different ways to win. But while it might not have been the flashiest way to do so, it was still impressive for the season. She played the cards that she was dealt and was able to turn over a pretty damn good hand from it.
Okay. You ready to get to some questions from the listeners?
Let's do it.
Okay. All right. This is from John in DC. Can Danny's strategy ever win again? She's the only winner to win by infiltrating the dominant alliance. Modern players shut that down quickly unless the weasel is a jury goat like Sherry. Could Danny's strategy ever win again?
Let me point people to a young woman by the name of Michelle Fitzgerald. I think that there is some DNA of Danny in Michelle a bit in terms of she certainly was on the out by the time the Julia vote came around, right? She had to infiltrate that alliance, and certainly things went her way. She had to win challenges. She was able to avoid a couple of votes where she would have been the next out. But I do think there's some very similar gameplay, especially then when they really pumped up the social game. Danny's a very good social player. So I actually do feel like there are ways, albeit under some extraordinary circumstances, to win still in this day and age as more of the Danny, Michelle social player type.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Danny path to win is every single losing player's Hail Mary. Every single one of them is going to try this, and under the right conditions, it'll work. If the opposing alliance has a certain structure that they need an extra person to use as a vote, and you provide them the right, you're the right person for them. You don't screw it up by being too wishy-washy or anything like that. You win the right competitions at exactly the right time, and boom, you've won the game. I mean, it happens in Big Brother. It happens in Survivor. It's always going to be a possibility.
But I think the beauty of what Danny does here in this season, and also, Chris also does it well in Vanuatu, is I feel like that in modern Survivor, we tend to see the person who's going to go full Troy's in. And we've seen Mike Holloway make it work, Ben Driebergen make it work, where it's like, I'm going to then just go, toe to toe with the big alliance, where Danny was able to infiltrate the right power brokers in the majority alliance, which ultimately got her to the end. I think it's harder to burrow underneath enemy lines and then get in, as opposed to just I'm going to take them all on and win every challenge or play the idols at the right spots.
Well, does that come from the fact that that era that Danny and Chris came from didn't have those things that you can rely on as outs, right? Like Mike and Ben can say, it's okay if I don't get along with the people in power. I just need to find things that can keep me safe another day in the game. Whereas Chris and Danny can then say, look, I can win immunity today. Doesn't guarantee I'm going to win it tomorrow. So let me try to use this time that I'm safe to broker things that'll keep me in the game longer. And so they have much more longevity, and I think are much less hopping from rock to rock than maybe those two other guys you mentioned.
I would definitely say that I think that, I talked about the conditions need to be right. I think in the modern era of Survivor, the conditions are less likely to be right, mostly because the jury is not going to respect the Danny game as much. The jury, the quote unquote bitter juries are
Where's your resume?
Fewer and farther between. Yes, absolutely. And part of that, I'm sure, is because there are more ways to make a name for yourself. And if you do just slide by, even if they don't like the person, even if they feel like, oh, Steph betrayed me, but at least she did something. At least she worked for it instead of being dragged along. And sure, burrowing in and making nice with the people in power is nice and all, but they were the people in power. And we want to have a big winner.
And I do wonder if Danny's win and production's view of it helps contribute to the final three, which is coming up in just 2 seasons, where Danny can win up against Stephanie when it's basically contrasted against a person who was an unlikable person who nobody was going to vote for anyway. Had this been a final 3 of Rafe and Danny and Steph, I'm not sure necessarily how that ultimately plays out. I think that's actually a really interesting vote between Stephanie ultimately might get 0 votes because
I don't think she's getting a vote. So I think it would come down to Rafe Danny
versus Danny.
And then from there, I think it's a matter of, can Rafe do what Steph doesn't in this final tribal council and be able to tell the people that he backstabbed, hey, this is why I did it, and I apologize for doing it. It's a great question, because I think when we talk about the onus of the final 3, it usually comes back to Panama, where it's Cirie goes out of final 4, Terry goes out of final 3. That would have been the best final 2. Let's create a way so that these bigger players can make it. I wonder, who was production hoping would win in Survivor Guatemala? Was it Rafe? It's such an odd cast and such an odd season that I do wonder who their rooting interest was.
I don't know that it was Rafe, to be honest. I mean, they clearly, again, the call they make at the final 3 immunity challenge is a call that they made. I have to imagine that they wanted Steph to win, but then when she didn't, they were like, all right, sorry, but we're gonna help bury you a bit here, because you didn't win. But I have to imagine that at the time they wanted her to win, because if she had won, I guarantee you that would have been a different edit, and that would have been a different Steph, and it would have been a different reaction.
Does that affect as well the way that these mixed seasons are cast moving forward? Right? Like, I do wonder if the fact that Stephanie loses so badly here maybe dulls players to the idea of, okay, maybe a returning player, they definitely won't win the season against these new players, so we can do it more often. And then we end up this whole string of things, right, where Parvati wins, and then Boston Rob's going to win, Coach loses, but then, you're going to get all this proliferation of returning players in the finals. If Stephanie wins here, do the producers take a step back and go, this concept is a little broken. I'm glad we tried it, but let's never do it again?
I don't know. It really comes down to just like thinking about this like fourth dimensionally. What if Stephanie wins and is beloved even more? If Stephanie becomes like the biggest phenomenon that the show has ever had, where it's like she played back to back and then she came back and won, and people are like, are we trying to find the next Stephanie? Is Stephanie playing a third time?
I think they lean into it. I think they do.
Yeah. So, this is a question from Peter, who wants to ask Taran specifically, as an expert of the Legacy Watch, what does revisiting Guatemala impact your view of Dani as a winner? Or do you think that Winners at War did significant damage to her legacy? I'm a huge fan of Dani. Thought she got a raw deal / edit in Winners at War.
I will say, I do think that Dani's legacy took a hit in Winners at War. It certainly did with me. I think it probably did with me more so than it did with the general audience. But that's because I felt very highly about Dani. I really, I remembered her stealth bomber line. I remembered her beat the radar line. And I thought that was so clever. Going back and watching it, I have doubts. I have doubts about the idea that she was hiding all of this extra strategy from the producers. Because what was the extra strategy is my biggest question. It's not like there was anything super complicated going on behind the scenes. We saw basically what was going on. And when she was making moves, she was telling the cameras about, oh, I need to convince Rafe that Judd is going after him. I need to do this over here because this is what's happening. I need to find the cracks. Here's the cracks. And that was pretty descriptive. And if she was hiding those things, then why was she saying them then? So, for me, I definitely, I'm not as awed by the sort of like legend of Dani that used to be in my head. I still really appreciate what she did. I think it takes a lot to remain calm and to make those relationships and identify what needs to be done. And, she had to get lucky with the competitions. She had to get lucky with the conditions, but she played it as well as she could have given those circumstances. And I really respect that. In terms of her legacy, again, not as high as it used to be for me, but I still like her as a winner, and I still love the season.
Yeah, I think we come back to the question that Jeff asked Gary at the reunion. Gary, is Dani underrated? I think the correct answer is maybe now.
Yeah, I think maybe now. I think maybe overrated going into Winners at War, but I think given her edit, which I'm sure she's going to talk about with you, Rob, because I know that she has certainly said that the way that her personification of her boot on Winners at War was probably a mis-edit in terms of what actually happened. People are now trashing her game. Now, I think we can say at this point in 2021, she's underrated, but maybe at the beginning of 2020, she might be a bit overrated considering how much power she actually had in the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. And I think that, I think that just because the edit was a certain way in Winners War, I do think that people overreacted to that. So I think you're completely right. I think that we've probably missed the middle ground, which is probably where it should be.
We missed the radar.
KCH says, do you think that watching Palau and then watching Guatemala immediately after could help this season's overall ranking?
It does feel like a bit of a sequel. I mean, and I think, again, that's part of why it's like Survivor Guatemala is almost like the straight to DVD sequel of Survivor Palau.
The Disney DVD sequel.
Yeah, it's like Aladdin 2. Like
from the makers of Survivor Palau, it's Survivor Guatemala.
We didn't get all the Empire. We didn't get all the original voices, but Stephanie and Bobby John are back.
Exactly. So
We've even got animal sidekicks. Here's a howler monkey and a dead chicken.
yeah, nailed it.
Yeah. Okay. How about this from Erica L? How does this season change if Stephanie and Bobby John were on the opposite starting tribes?
I still feel like, again, because the starting tribes didn't really matter. I think it's more
what
so
starting tribes.
Well, I think the question is more so, what if they end up on opposite post-swap tribes? Because again, I think pre-swap, both of them are going to stay. I think they were both regarded as like hardworking, and nobody was essentially going to get rid of them for weakness. I think post-swap is interesting because would she then be in the minority? Like, whose spot to take? Or is it her, Gary, Brian, and Amy in the majority on that tribe?
Yeah. So I think that's probably bad news for Danny and Blake and Brandon when they switch over there. I think it's also bad news for Bobby John, who I think then probably has to cede some power to Margaret over there.
And also, he's going to be on a tribe with Jamie, and that's not going to be good news.
Yeah, but maybe on the same tribe.
Maybe they could have bonded earlier.
They could have bonded earlier. Yeah. Okay. How about Jake says, if Cindy gives up the car, does it change her game at all, or is she always going to finish fifth?
Yeah, we talked about this before. She was always going to finish fifth. It's just a matter of whether or not she walks home with a car or not. I think Rafe says, yeah, exactly. Rafe says, would I really want to vote Cindy out if she gave me a car? Yes, you would have, Rafe. You'd feel bad about it, but at the end of the day, I think you've convinced yourself that getting rid of Cindy here is the right move. So I think Cindy really had no place in the end with that ironclad final three alliance unless she wins out. So damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Let's talk quickly about who should have played again, whether or not they will. Who should have played again? Mike, you look like your eyes lit up.
Well, I feel like there's a whole list of people. Again, I feel like this is a very, very strong cast from pre-merge to post-merge of people that I would have really liked to see play again at some point. The tough thing is, like, do you want to see them come back now is maybe another type of question. Like, I would love to see Judd come back. I don't know if I want to see Judd come back for Survivor in the 40s.
Yeah. He was in the mix, I know, at various points. I think that most notably, I think the closest he ever got was that he was in the mix for the Blood versus Water.
Him and his twin, Bud.
I think it was probably going to be with his wife.
Okay, because I know that
would they missed opportunity. Where was that like the Rupert spot? Because that's a no-brainer.
Yeah, because I know that Cindy and Mindy were also in contact for Blood versus Water as well. So I don't know if they were going for a twin theme. I mean, Judd is just such an incredible character. The one thing is, the rumor is that production did not have a good time dealing with him, which you can imagine, I think, given the way that Judd behaves. What we love about him may not be lovable from a production perspective. So I can understand it. Maybe they feel like he's sort of a trouble case to work with. I don't want to necessarily do that, but
you're a damn liar, man. Why would you say that, man?
But damn, I would have loved to see Judd come back, especially when they were proliferate with the alcohol rewards in those seasons of Survivor. To have Judd come back and just start downing beers and like join Carl Boudreaux and some other like Tom Buchanan just for the Survivor drinking club.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was Rafe ever asked to come back?
I don't believe so. And honestly, I think it's because if you look at the big characters from the season, I don't think Rafe's necessarily regarded that highly. I feel like if you're going for, again, like we talked about with Brian, that archetype, right, of the young, nerdy, strategic superfan, at this point, we are like overloaded with those types of people that we can bring back for returnees. So I think, unfortunately, Rafe has sort of missed his chance. And I think
that now he can come back as the like Mike White, right? Like, are
you a fan of Wheel of Time?
What about Gary Hogaboom? Do you think he ever got any looks after this?
I would love it. I would love a season actually if we had the former Survivor athletes on, and maybe throw in not only the former Survivor athletes, but also like Heidi Hamel's husband, Stephanie's husband, like the athletes related to Survivor. Because I really do think if we're tiering athletes who have played Survivor from a character perspective, Gary Hogaboom might be number one. Like he's the alpha from the very first one, and he might be top as well.
Is he the best player?
He's definitely the best player. I think that if you're talking about players, I think he's definitely up there with like a Brad Culpepper. If you're talking characters, I think it's him and Jeff Kent as 1 and 2.
If Gary makes the merge in the majority, I mean, he's definitely a front runner win, right? Like, people liked him on that.
Gary is an incredibly underrated player, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I know we like to talk about, lol, Gary Hawkins couldn't keep alive stuff, but he was actually playing a really strong game. He was able for that one round to convince Stefan Rafe to come over to his side. Like if he had momentum going, he could have done a really good work in this game. It just so happens that like his threat level caught up with him too much at the final 7.
My favorite part about Gary returning is that his opening sort of montage would be I came back. I played in Guatemala, and some people were able to recognize me, but this time nobody will know that I was a former NFL quarterback. This time I'll definitely fly under the radar.
See, I thought what you were going to say is that he's going to come back in a new player season, and people are going to ask, like, are you Gary Hogaboom from Survivor? No, I'm a landscaper.
No,
I told them I was a landscaper. I didn't have to tell them what I was 15 years ago.
No, I wasn't as Nilsson. You can ask. Actually, we're on the 15-year anniversary of Gary being a Survivor player, so he can now say like he can lie about being I'm not Gary Hogaboom or Gary Hawkins. I'm Gary Hughes. That's me. I'm a horse breeder. So if you ask me anything about husbandry, I'm here.
So let's get into our survey results for this season of Survivor. Every week we poll the audience and ask them what they're thinking about the season that we rewatch. Okay. Who's the season's MVP?
This is a really tough one because again, it's such an odd ensemble of a cast. If there's no adjective connotated to it, I would say Stephanie. But again, like because of the edit she gets, does that discourage anyone from voting her the MVP?
For me, it's Judd.
Okay. Judd is in third. Stephanie's in second. Rafe, MVP, 43%.
Okay. Yeah.
25% for Steph.
Hyper strategic crowd. I think it would make sense they go for it. Because I think Rafe is the player of the season. I think he's the source of basically all the moves that go on in the post-merge. So I think it makes sense that despite him getting this odd edit, that he still gets the MVP award.
Strategically, Rafe is the MVP. For me, Judd is the overall MVP.
Okay. What one-time player would you like to see come back and play in a future season?
I think, again, if we're going with hyper strategic, I think I'm going to pick from the pre-merge. I think Brian Corrinan ends up being number 1 here.
I wanted Brian to come back for so long. And as far as I know, he still wants to, right?
Oh,
very much so.
He expressed displeasure in this being the 27th best season in the rankings on Twitter.
Rightfully so.
Okay. But which one-time player did the audience vote for?
This could be Rafe again, too.
It's got to be Rafe or Brian, right?
Yeah, I would imagine. They're competing for the same spot again.
Yes, Rafe is number 1, 41%. Judd is 2 with 22%. Brian is 3rd with 13%. Okay, this is my favorite question. What name on the list made you think to yourself, wait, who's that?
I think if people remembered Morgan's profession more, she would not be in this conversation. But like, I'm again going with your theory of second boots, Rob. It might be Morgan.
I would guess either Brianna or Jim.
Well, which do you guess?
I'll go Brianna.
Brianna is right. First boots, people remember the first boots. It's rarely the first boot. Second boot, third boot is where people forget. Brianna.
Morgan is another name in Survivor. So like even if you don't remember who Morgan was
McDevitt
in this season,
is
you remember other Survivor.
So if there was a pirate by the name of Henry Brianna, then she'd be remembered more.
Exactly.
Okay. So it goes Brianna 30%, Morgan 27%, Brooke
that's close.
Struck 26%.
I told you the nothings.
Yeah. Okay. Then who's the most underrated player of the season?
So we just said Gary, but the question is, did the audience say the same thing?
It might be Cindy. I feel like Cindy's an under the radar fave from the season.
Let me go off the book, or should I say off the radar? I'm gonna guess Danny.
Yeah, Danny is number 2, 18%. Number 1 is Rafe, 24%.
How is Rafe underrated?
Yeah, okay, look, people think he should have come back maybe. And
Okay.
Gary Hogaboom, 14%. Cindy not in the top 3.
Huh.
All right. The Kelly Wentworth Award for Best Pre-Merge Boot.
Brian.
So this is Brian, though I hope it's competitive with Amy, because I really do feel like Amy is an incredible pre-merge character as well.
So Brian is number 1, 58%.
Wow.
Amy with 29%. And the Jordan Kalish joke vote coming in 4.5% for Blake Towsley.
Wow, but Brian getting twice as many votes as Amy.
Golden boy with his 3rd place vote.
He's putting in the work, Brian Corden, to make it known that he, was robbed of his chance. And so hopefully he does get one day.
Okay. Out of the 40 seasons, we ask people to rate from 1 to 40. Where does Danny land as a winner?
I'm going to go with the number that this podcast is. I'm going to say 27. I feel like it's definitely in the bottom 3rd, but I feel like there are some definitive people that fill out the bottom there from player rankings that Danny's close, but maybe not necessarily there.
Yeah, I'll go with around a 30th.
30th. Okay, Mike hit it on the head. 27. The tabulator, Kurt Clark, has been ranking these. That puts Danny at the 11th best win out of the 14th seasons that we've watched. She is just above Ben Driebergen, Fabio, and Chris Underwood, and she is right underneath Mike Holloway.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we just talked about how disparate their games were in terms of underdogs working their way in.
Okay, is this season too high, too low, or just right?
Too low.
Too low. Yes, 44% said too low. What season is coming up next in the rankings?
Okay. So, listen, I want it to be Survivor All-Stars, but we can't have nice things. So I don't think it's Survivor All-Stars. I am waiting for the day for it to happen. Again, I still say it's criminal.
I'm not.
That this season is below it, but that is neither here nor there. So the question is, do we continue with some of the more quote unquote forgotten seasons, and you throw in a Panama that is more forgotten, has some love behind it, but not nearly as much love as as a bunch of these other seasons? Or do you go with something like Gabon or Samoa, where some people really don't like it, but some people absolutely love it, and it averages out in the middle?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking Panama. I feel like Samoa and Gabon both have too many people that love them.
Okay. I'll tell you, the audience said Gabon. That's the audience prediction is Gabon. 37% of the audience said that they think it will be Gabon. Okay, I could tell you that next week we have coming up for you the audience knows it's Gabon.
Okay.
Survivor Gabon is coming up next week. Next Wednesday, I will be with Maggie Morgan and Phil Thompson. We will post that Wednesday night because Taran will be back live with Big Brother. Now, Taran, I know we're kind of close to Big Brother. You want to let us know what you have coming up, just in case we're kind of too close if you need to drop off?
Yes. Well, tonight the episode is going to start in about 13 minutes. So I'm going to be, watching that, and we'll be doing the podcast right after. We'll be talking about. It's going to be a big episode here, Big Brother Canada 9.
Yes.
Big moves happening. Tomorrow morning, I will be live at 11 a.m. Eastern to update you on everything that happened today on the feeds. Although you should check out this morning's if you want to.
Great live feed update today.
If you want more Taran reenactments like you got on the Judd conversations in this episode, you can tune in for that.
Yes.
I really think the dream mashup scenario would be Spicy V meeting Judd. Put them in the just.
Oh yeah, especially when you say one of you lied, figure it out. There would be no blood left.
Yeah. Then tomorrow night, of course, double eviction. So we'll be live after the double eviction. Lots of great stuff there with Big Brother, and on Saturday, Circle coverage. The finale will have aired, and we will talk about the ending of the Circle UK season 3. So lots of fun stuff coming up.
Okay. All right. Let me tell you about where things are in my rankings. Last week, I forgot to tell you that I thought that Survivor Fiji was the third best season I had watched in the 2021. I could tell you that Survivor Guatemala, I will say, was the new number one season I've watched for 2021. I have it now ahead of Ghost Island.
I'm so happy. I was really hoping that would be the case. Again, I know that this is a forgotten season, but it's one that I really love. And I think there's a lot of enjoyment to be ascertained from it. So I'm glad you certainly did, Rob.
I mean, I enjoyed it in Survivor, the TEOS. I just feel like that is Survivor Guatemala the kind of thing where, it's the food that you eat and then 30 minutes later you're hungry again. I just feel like that I can't get it to stick with me. I enjoy it when I watch it, but then I do tend to forget about it.
For me, it was like you kind of had to be there. Like I think it holds a place in my heart because like when it aired, it was one of 11 seasons, and now there are so many Survivor seasons, and it really does kind of get lost. And there's just like it's kind of been outpaced in every area, but the very few unique things it holds. And when I go back to watch it now, the lack of strategy is kind of lame, and it doesn't necessarily hold up as much as it did when I first watched it. And it seems so exciting and fresh and interesting and brutal. And those things don't age as well, I think, as interesting strategy, but. For me, at least, that nostalgia that I have for it, and those unique aspects, the characters, and the moments that the characters have, will forever hold a place in my heart.
Yeah, this is not a strategy season. This is a personality season, and that has this in spades. In my rankings, I believe I have Guatemala at number 15. Like, I think this is a solid B plus season. It is not an all-timer, but it's a season that I always go back to, and I'm like, oh, remember Guatemala? Like, remember Judd freaking out about Margaret saying he had ADD and interrupting her? You remember Jamie and Bobby John bumping chests in the middle of a challenge and nearly knocking each other out? Like, there's so many fun moments packed in here. It's almost a microcosm of the teen era of Survivor, which I have a lot of love for, because that's when I really sort of like came into more of an understanding with Survivor, where there's a lot of weirdness going on. Survivor's going to introduce so much, but there still is heart in there with characters and moves being figured out. The final two still exists. So I feel like Guatemala is a fun representation of that era. And I certainly have a lot of love for it, especially even getting to rewatch it now. Just watching these personalities interact on the Mayan pyramids is something I have had and will immensely enjoy from here on out.
Okay. Well, this was so much fun to go through with the two of you here today. I hope everybody enjoyed hearing this one. Let me just tell you about what's coming up. Danny Boatwright, going to talk to her. Get that Talking with T-Bird going, and we will hear Danny's thoughts on Survivor Guatemala, of course, Winners at War, whatever else with T-Bird coming up this weekend on Talking with T-Bird. If you missed it last night, it was the Patron 5 for 5 number 200, where Nicole and I got together. We put it in the main feed for the patrons. You got to see the video of everything that we did. Got to see the live show. We posted it to YouTube for patrons only. If you're interested in that sort of thing, robiswebsite.com/patron. But everybody can hear the 200th episode of the Patron 5 for 5 with Nicole Cesternino. Of course, 90 Day Fiance was back this week. If you like ranting Rob, check out this week's edition of 90 Day Fiance, where Puya and I talked about a poor excuse for an episode that 90 Day Fiance tried to pass off this week.
Wow.
How about that? Yes. Of course, all things Big Brother Canada live tonight for the Wednesday night show. And then even more coming your way on Thursday as well with the live feed update. And then also the eviction show. We'll be talking tough as nails, Mike.
Yeah.
Final team challenge.
Phil Kogan's probably going to show up. We are rounding the bend on that. We are putting the roof on that house. 2 episodes left, and things are tied for a piece. They're going to war like the Maya are, but hopefully no heads will roll here. There's been enough injury going on Tough as Nails this season. They can't afford it.
Sure. At least nobody ripped their bicep. Okay, of course. Everything we have going on. Patron Family Feud coming up on Friday. I've told you about this Survivor Guatemala feedback show with the 3 amigos. Kalish, Robertson, and Fishman coming up this weekend as well. I believe that's going to be on Sunday this weekend. And of course, more Patron 5 for 5. Next week, we'll do our Facebook Friday. Much more. I have our patron orientation coming up at the end of the month, the last Tuesday of the month. I want to say hello to all the new patrons at robhasawebsite.com/patron. And of course, if you're watching the YouTube video, hit that subscribe button and then hit that bell to be notified whenever we're going live with whether it's live feed updates or Survivor countdowns or whatever else. Check that out over at our YouTube channel, robhasawebsite.com/YouTube. And of course, you could follow us on social media to get more clips from the show. All right. Mike, what do you have coming up?
Should we start or end with the Survivor adjacent things? What do you think? Is it better start or beginning?
I think start with Survivor.
Okay, so let's start with Survivor. So Survivor South Africa, our coverage of season 5 just wrapped. I know Shannon did a couple of deep dives with the finalists. I have 2 deep dives coming as well with the 5th placer and the 1st juror. I will not disclose their identities, but they are very fun interviews. And we're actually gearing up for, in the coming weeks, Survivor South Africa season 8 is on the horizon, a brand new season of Survivor. And so myself and Shannon Gus got the opportunity to send in some questions for preseason interviews for the contestants. So the way it's going to work is basically when the cast gets revealed, we're going to be releasing a bunch of podcasts where we're going to play our interviews, talk through these 20 players, finally get some new faces going in Survivor. It is incredibly exciting. So if you are jonesing for Survivor content that is not 15 years old, there is some new Survivor content, of course, on the horizon. And then, of course, Rob, you and I have the Outwit, Outplay, Outlist series always going strong. And then when it comes to reality TV stuff, Rob, you mentioned Tough as Nails, which we are rounding out the coverage on. In terms of other reality TV stuff, I'm doing some writing over at parade.com. I'm doing exit press for the new season of Top Chef, and breaking news are happening now. Yes. I believe I just got confirmation about this. I'm going to be doing exit press for this season of The Circle US, which is premiering next week. So certainly going to be a very fun time. I can't wait to listen to those podcasts. And if you want to hear some extra stuff, I'm going to be talking with these lovely catfishers that I'm sure Lydia would love to fish for over the course of the next few weeks. And then over on Poster Recaps, of course, we have a bevy of things going on between Lost Down the Hatch, between the Bloom Files, which is an X-Files podcast where my wife has seen every episode and I have seen Bupkis and we talk about it. I'm covering Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which is also reaching its back half. And then some other random Mishigosh in the patron feed. I played Dungeons and Dragons, where I got to play with a character that had been created for me that I didn't know about until I entered the stream. It's very much like a big twist where here comes my character ascending down from the pyramids and I have to play with them. So it was a very good time. I asked for his autograph after the show. Lots of stuff, and I'm sure certainly more to come. I pimp it all out at a Mike Bloom type on all social media platforms.
All right. Well, let's give Taran at least 60 seconds before Big Brother Canada starts. All right. Anything else you want to say?
No, I mean, excited for Gabon next week. Gabon is, I used the term before of train wreck seasons, right? Ones where you really can't tell who's in power because everything just goes off the rails at a certain point. Gabon really is one of them. In fact, it might be like the chief engineer of the train wreck seasons, for better and for worse. It's certainly going to be an interesting season to talk about no matter what. Yeah.
Okay. Taran, anything?
Come find me on Twitch. I'll be live in a couple of minutes here.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a good one.
Together.
Bye.